Good afternoon, everyone. We'll return to open session. Before I start, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared as part of today's open session agenda? Hearing none, let's proceed. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome back to Van Hise Hall. For those of you who are newer to the Board of Regents, know that for many decades and many meetings, this was where the Board of Regents met. It's a little cramped by today's standards, but it does have some of the best views on campus. Our return to Van Hise is temporary, but I encourage you to look around the room, and in particular notice there's in our portrait gallery a new picture that's been put up by one of our very own former Regent President Milner.
All right.
We have a full schedule this afternoon, but before we get started, President Cross has some introductions. President Cross.
Thank you, President Bailing. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce a familiar face, Dr. Jackie Weisenberger, who has been named UW Superior's interim provost and vice chancellor of academic affairs. So Jackie previously served from 2016 to 2018 in that role. And so we look forward to working with you again, Jackie. So welcome.
Thank you.
As you are. Please note she's wearing the appropriate colors. President Bailey.
Thank you. This afternoon, we're going to take a closer look at student behavioral health, an issue that some experts have called a growing crisis on our nation's campuses. As we heard last month on a discussion about student success, many factors are involved, and supporting behavioral health is a key role. To further inform our future decision-making, we've convened a diverse panel today to discuss and provide a variety of perspectives on this very important issue. Know that we encourage board members to ask questions. I see this not as a presentation, but rather as a discussion this afternoon. At this time, I'd like to invite our panelists to take a seat at the head of the table and ask that Sandy Scott, Chief Student Affairs Officer at UW Stout, to get us started. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. The SSAOs have been working hard on this topic and this presentation and the opportunity to have this dialogue, and we're incredibly appreciative of that. In fact, you mentioned the last presentation at the board with the EAB, and Regent Mueller, without being a plant, actually had a great segue at that last board meeting when she asked about mental health as part of student success and the whole EAB initiative. And I think what we're going to share with you will help frame sort of a conversation around how behavioral health or mental health is an important part of a student's ability to be successful. Today, what you're going to hear in our presentation or in this conversation is you're going to have an opportunity to hear from some of our students, 3 students, and their experiences on their campuses. You're going to have an opportunity to hear from some other SSAOs. You're going to have an opportunity to hear some data from a national survey that all of the UW system institutions participate in. And at the, we also will have another SSAO come up at the end so that we can certainly entertain other questions that you may have, as well as one of our provosts who's going to present a picture of what this looks like in the classroom, because we think that's an important piece as well. We know that the likelihood that people in this room have perhaps had a family member, a relative, a coworker, a close friend who has also perhaps struggled with a mental health issue, we know this can be incredibly personal, so we acknowledge that. The headlines that you see on the screen in front of you are real headlines, and one of the things that we think it's important to note and to state at the very onset is this is not just an issue on UW system campuses, is not just an issue in the state of Wisconsin, but rather this is an issue that is a national one, and you'll see that reflected in some of the data. But ultimately, we also know that there are things we can do, and while there are challenges that await us, there are also opportunities that we can certainly be thinking about. So there are some key takeaways that we hope will happen as a result of this discussion and this dialogue. And the first is that students are reporting increased behavioral health issues and seeking help in record numbers. And so as a way to sort of begin that dialogue, a question I might have for you is, why do you think that is? Why do we know that students are reporting increased behavioral health issues and seeking help? Thoughts on that?
I hope it's because there's less stigma associated with it.
That is absolutely true. There is less stigma. It's not to say that we've erased all stigma associated with seeking help, but we do know that there is less stigma and students are more willing to come forward with issues. That's another reason.
Maybe increased confidence that they can actually make some progress.
Yes, absolutely. And especially because another big important reason is because we know that diagnoses are happening earlier, right? And at a younger age, students may present perhaps in K-12 rather than before they get to college. Not to say that those issues can't also onset at the college years, but between decreased stigma and the opportunity to be diagnosed earlier, those are two reasons.
What about prevalence? Is there actually more?
We're actually going to talk about that with some of the data as well, because that's a common question, right? Is it really that are there more students with mental health issues, or is it those other two factors that are predominantly reaching? We also know that more students are coming to campus already having received medications as part of their therapy too, which can have an impact as well, and we're going to talk about that. So we are going to, one of the other things I would just share too, where we're also seeing it, sort of that desire of students to share that information earlier. Many of our admissions colleagues will talk about how currently on admissions applications, it is not uncommon for students in the essay to talk about the mental health experiences that they've had in their K-12 experience and how they've overcome those, how they're working on them. So we see it even at the time of the application, where students are more willing to talk about that. So that is the first takeaway. The second takeaway, we're going to spend time focusing today on three primary areas of mental health. It's not to say they're the only three, but in the essence of time, those are the three we're really going to focus on. And that would be anxiety, depression, and suicide. And John will share some of the data there. And then finally, and perhaps I could argue, maybe most importantly, but we know that behavioral health can really impact the ability of the student to learn in the classroom, to be academically successful, ultimately to be retained. So we know that when there are these issues, that those kinds of things can all be impacted. And ultimately, our goal as senior student affairs officers and individuals working with these students is to keep them, help them graduate, and ultimately end up as productive members of our workforce. So just so we're all on the same page, when we talk about behavioral health, we're going to use the definition today. It comes from the World Health Organization, will sometimes be referred to as emotional well-being, sometimes mental health. But any thoughts about what percentage of students, college students, the national level, might rate their behavioral health as below average or poor?
I've looked ahead, but it's a staggering number.
Thank you. It is a staggering number because it's about 50%. About half of our students indicate that they rate their behavioral health at below average or poor. And as you hear that, I know what we are really talking about is the ability of our students to deal with stresses that come from the college experience. And I don't think any of us are advocating that college should be stress-free. In fact, that's just not realistic, right? Part of how we learn and grow is from some discomfort. But when that discomfort reaches a level of being overwhelming, and actually there's a lot of data at the national level that says for first-year students, the number one thing they report, or the number one characteristic they have self-reported for the past few years, feeling most often, is overwhelmed. And it's in that feeling of being overwhelmed, often related to stress, that they just feel like I can't function, or I'm not sure how I can actually work through this. So we admit students holistically in the UW system. We have a holistic admission process, meaning we look at the whole student, everything they bring to that experience. And when we see them struggling academically, we provide tutoring services to help them. And when we see them struggling emotionally, we provide counseling services and other things to help them as well. So there are a number of reasons why today's students are more stressed. In the essence of time, I'm going to highlight three of those because I think they're an important context to understand when we're thinking about, so why is this 50% of our students reporting that? And what's different about them? Are they just all snowflakes who can't handle this? That's often what's portrayed. And the reality is there are some things that are different for this generation. The first is their perception of safety. So this generation has never known, but really only knows 9/11 and what's happened after it, right? So their perception of safety is very different than others. Most of us haven't had to grow up wondering if the kid sitting next to us in chemistry was secretly planning to kill us. They just haven't had to think about, we haven't had to think about those things. So the perception of safety for this generation is both on an international level and perhaps what's happening, but it's also on that local level. Can I feel safe in my own communities? The second is economic. For this generation, many of them know that while college affords them a great opportunity, they have to be concerned about college debt, and they have to be concerned about the fact that what they hear is that they are likely to not do better than their parents financially, even after obtaining that college degree. And that can be overwhelming. Again, another stress factor. And then finally, technology, which also would probably not come as a surprise, but for many of these students, social media presents these pictures and images of everyone else is doing better than I am. I can curate who I want to be on social media, and if I'm a person who's already feeling overwhelmed, feeling less than, feeling like I don't matter, I don't have the skills to make it, suddenly I may start to be looking at everything else and thinking I will never be able to do that. And that contributes to that feeling of being overwhelmed. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about behavioral health. So one of the things we want to do to frame this discussion is to begin to think about, and this comes from public health, so this is not a higher education model, this is a public health model. And it's really a framework for how students can be well, how students can be successful. And there's 3 tiers. And if we think about tier 3 at the very bottom, and maybe think about this as a pyramid, tier 3, the bottom tier, is really where the majority of our students are. They don't need counseling. They don't need crisis management. But what they do need, perhaps, is just strategies and ways to create and maintain healthy, balanced lifestyles. Again, that is the majority of our students. So that's a really good thing. But there are things we can do there. One example, UW-Superior has a wonderful center for mindfulness and well-being. It's a really proactive approach to equipping students with the skills they need to develop resiliency, to find balance in their lives, and to be productive, contributing members. And it also partners with the local Superior community. My colleague from Superior will be up here at the end and can answer any specific questions. So that's that tier 3, and there are things we need to do there in this model if we want to address the mental health issue. Tier 2 is really these targeted interventions, and we do have specific populations that are more at risk and that experience stress and these feelings of being overwhelmed at higher rates and higher levels. One of the things here I would highlight as a targeted intervention for a specific group was a new initiative from UW-Stout this past year, where all of our Division III athletes were screened in a very brief screening approach prior to the start of their season, because being an athlete is really overwhelming. At a D3 institution, when the emphasis is on students, right? And so with a number of questions, a few questions, just a few minutes per athlete that they were asked, we were able to identify which athletes, even prior to starting the season, might be more at risk for developing a potential mental health issue that could impede their ability to be successful in the classroom. 15%, approximately 15% of our athletes were referred as a result of that. Not required, but referred and encouraged to consider the resources available to them to help them be a successful student and athlete. There is some thought that the NCAA moving forward down the road might require this. We were one of the first to pilot that on our campus, and we saw the benefits from doing that. And then finally, tier 1, which is the day-to-day work that our counseling centers do, that our student health centers do. And this is our smallest group of students, fortunately, but they are also our students who are most at risk. And this is what we manage on a day-to-day basis, and you'll hear about that as we go forward. There we emphasize as an institutional example, and we say UW-Whitewater, but really we do have behavior intervention teams at all of our campuses. And these are teams that are comprised of individuals from across campus, health and counseling, dean of students office, police, disability services, sometimes academic affairs, to come together. And when students are referred often by a faculty or staff member as a student of concern, this is a team that can come together, sort of connect the dots to say, is this a student we need to perhaps have a case management approach with? Is this someone that we can refer? Who's best to refer? And how can we connect the student to resources to be successful? So behavior intervention teams became fairly standard after Virginia Tech, but they have been held up as a model of success across the country. So we believe this framework, we're going to refer to it near the end too, but we think it can be really helpful. It's important to note that not students can go between those tiers, and there's a lot of fluidity. It's not hard lines, but that it's important to know and understand that these are important interventions happen at all these levels. And so before we move on to looking at the data, are there any immediate questions that come to mind that you're thinking about? And then we're going to explore the specific data from the survey.
Board members, any other questions?
Just a quick question. We've put, I think, a much larger focus on this, and I think it's very appropriate and timely. When we think about budgets and investments, this isn't core to student success is how it used to be thought about, and now I think it very much is.
Yeah.
Can you give an editorial comment as it relates to how you feel funding spreads across the campuses? Is it adequate? Is it areas where people are making capacity decisions to say we've got to double down on this?
Yep, thank you for that question. I think, and just so that there's an understanding, this is funded, counseling services in particular, and student health services are funded in a couple of ways. It's usually a combination of student psych fees and a combination of GPR dollars. Depending on each institution is somewhat different. But I think the important thing there is I would agree, it is critical to student success. I think we know that now. And when we don't invest, what happens is we lose those students. We have a slide coming up that will show you specifically when we haven't been able to keep, and we can't staff our way out of this issue. None of us are here to say that today. We also can't policy our way out of this issue. It's a complex problem that requires complex solutions, but resources matter. And often what happens, if you think about the framework, and John will show specifically a slide that shows where we are at with counseling across the system with the demand. Of course that matters and it's really important. But what happens is when we're taking care of the crisis issues and the students most at risk, we lose the opportunity and we just don't have the resources, usually staff, to be able to hit the target interventions and to create the healthy learning environments to help prevent the crisis level from occurring. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Regent Klein.
Yes, I'm glad to hear. Thank you for all you've given us in terms of material here. But I'm so glad to hear that we've got behavioral intervention teams at every campus.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I guess I have, do we have a companion policy? I mean, I think these teams do a really good job of assessing threats,
Yes.
both to self-harm kinds of threats as well as threats to others. What do we do with that information? And, how does it unfold?
Yep, absolutely. Yes, and so the behavior intervention teams, often a subset, is also trained in threat assessment. True threat assessment, meaning threats to others. The behavior intervention teams are usually designed to look at threats to self. Sometimes there's an overlap, fortunately not often for all of us. So when we have that information about a particular student, we all manage that in a case management sort of way. So we're following and targeting. We track whether or not that student ultimately graduates, right? That's important to us to know. Did our interventions make a difference? In the aggregate, we're looking at it. If we have a number of students who are perhaps presenting with this, or we're noticing that we're really, this is hypothetical, it's not true, but let's say that in the Greek population, for example, we're seeing an increase in students who are talking about suicide. We can do targeted interventions by monitoring that data with our teams and then finding ways to get in and perhaps do some mental health screening within particular organizations. We also talk as team members or as teams across UW system quite regularly about what are we seeing, how can we work through these issues, what are you doing that might be successful that we can adapt. We collaborate quite often on that.
Regent Delgado.
Yeah, I have an observation. There are 13 four-year universities here, and there are, I would say, very different populations of students. Some universities, I was across yesterday, very heavily rural or small town, and then I came from UWM, and UWM is very heavily minority and urban. Something tells me that the issues should be different, and I'm not so sure they are or they're not, but are we able to discuss or be able to address the issues of different groups? Because as I talk to minority students, which I just did yesterday, then you see they have concerns about the environment that I have never heard on the typical urban white or farm or small town white. And you say, well, it seems to be something very specific here.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because as we're looking at these things, my question I have is, do we take into account the specific of the population that we have? And is there a big impact?
There is, and one of the things we won't have time to go into today is that there are student populations that are more at risk, and they include LGBTQ populations, students with disabilities, our students of color in particular. You're actually going to hear from one of our students who's going to talk about that need and how it manifests itself for her and her particular situation in her campus. So.
Higher risk of the same three factors, the same three areas as the main area, so that they have different source of risk?
Yes, they do, depending on the particular, certainly it varies by individual, but by group as well, there are different needs, absolutely. Okay.
Regent Wishburne.
When you talk about teams, are we talking about behavioral health professionals as opposed to what you might call lay
Yes.
managers?
The teams have both student health professionals, counseling professionals, deans of students office, disability services, university police. Absolutely. Yep. Want to move on now to sharing some of the data that we think will be incredibly helpful to you. And Dr. John Octor is the Associate Dean of Students at UW Stout, co-chaired the survey from the National Collegiate Health Assessment. That is a survey that gets distributed to all UW campuses and is also a licensed psychologist.
So thank you. I appreciate the honor of being here today too, and would invite all of you to grab a caffeinated beverage because I'm going to be talking. I'm going to show you bar graphs and line graphs, and I know it's after lunch, so we want to make sure that everybody.
You might as well stop right now.
I have an alternative answer to your question too. So
Don't go any further.
it's important to know when we're going to talk about survey data that all of our campuses get their individual data, and they get broken down also by some of these groups. And so they get to see how their campuses might look different and which student groups look different. So that's really important and one of the reasons we're doing these assessments across the entire system. So I'd like to start with a question too. And Sandy referenced earlier that this topic touches so many of us. And I know that from being a mental health practitioner for a lot of years. But I'd like to just ask, if you're willing, by a show of hands, how many of you have been touched by mental health of a family member or of a friend? This would be depression, anxiety, even a loss of life by suicide. Raise your
All the
hands.
confessions here,
Yeah, I didn't ask about yourself. Yeah, so almost everybody in this room raised their hand, right? So what that tells me is two things. First of all, just how prevalent this is in our world right now, not just with college students, not just with youth, but really with everyone. But it also tells me that we're more comfortable talking about it. So we referenced stigma earlier, and really in the course of my career, which is just over 20 years now, I've seen stigma reduce. I've seen more students being willing to talk about their mental health issues, and society has just changed in that way where we've become more willing to talk about this, more willing to seek services too. And so that's some of what you're going to see, how that is manifested on our campuses. So we're going to start just with one slide about high school students, because the Department of Public Instruction has done some work assessing mental health with the students that we inherit at our colleges. And the Wisconsin Youth Risk Behavior Survey is what you see on the slide. This is a national survey, actually, so every state has the opportunity to administer this. And these are self-reports from students in Wisconsin high schools in 2017 of significant either issues of self-harm, that would be most often cutting or burning. I'll talk about some definitions in a minute. Symptoms of depression, significant symptoms of depression, or significant anxiety. And we'll talk about definitions in a minute. But just briefly, I want to call on Regent Stanford Taylor, who I think is more knowledgeable than I about the DPI framework.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about pre-K-12 and what we're doing in the area of mental health. But first of all, I think I want to frame this so that you all understand that mental health, when we talk about it, is a continuum of high-level wellness to severe illness. So students can present anywhere on that continuum. But what we're finding from our youth risk behavior survey, which is administered every 2 years, is that 1 in 5 students have some mental health needs, and that over 80% of those students' needs go unaddressed. So that's what we're dealing with. We have not in the past had dedicated funding to this effort, but in the last budget, we were awarded $3.25 million to address this. We put that out, and the request exceeded the amount of money that we had available to grant to districts. I think we had over $8 million in requests with 136 applications, and 52 of those were awarded. So you mentioned the population of students who are most at risk. Many of those are LGBTQ students, students with disability, and our homeless students. But we've got a number of resources at the department that we're making available to districts and to families. One is we're trying to educate our staff so that they recognize some of these and can do assessments for our students. So we have SBIRT, so it's a student brief. Oh, you know what it is, okay.
Brief intervention, referral. Yeah.
Yes, referral to treatment. So many of the things that we have are available to all school districts. We train staff, we give grants, we support them through a center, which we call the WISH Center. And we also, in the last budget, got some money for pupil services, but it was only for social workers. And we know that in some of our rural areas, they have other pupil service professionals that might not be social workers. And so in this budget request, we're asking for additional support for other pupil services professionals. We're also asking for $63 million this time around to help address some of those concerns that are out there. And this has been an issue for our schools for a number of years, but recently, probably in the last 7, 8 years, it's gained more momentum. And I think the last time around when First Lady Tonette Walker started her initiative, Fostering Futures, that helped to elevate what we were trying to do around trauma-sensitive schools and started to work with counties and others in this. So we've got lots of collaborations around this work now and feel that we're preparing our educators to be able to recognize students in need, to get referrals out there and get services for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent. This is the type of thing that's happening in Wisconsin and in other states. And so part of what that means for us is that we have more students who are able to come to college because they've had services sooner, they've had treatment sooner, and they bring those issues with them. And so we have to figure out how to deal with that. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me for the next about 6 slides. This is where the data starts to come into play. And I want to tell the story of mental health really with depression, anxiety, and suicide on our campus. So this is a definition of depression that you see on the screen. Our surveys actually ask students about significant feelings of depression, but then it also asks students if they've ever been diagnosed or treated. Important to know when we get to the parts about diagnosed or treated of what the threshold is. And so this gives you some idea that a behavioral health disorder, depression, characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities, causing significant impairment in daily life. And so that's impairment in work, school, or relationships is usually how that's looked at. And so it needs to be a certain severity, a certain persistence, and a certain impact in order to reach that diagnostic level. And so, since you all have the slides, I'll skip my question, which was how many students report on our campuses that they've been diagnosed or treated in a given year, and it's 23%. And you're going to see in a second just how much that has changed over the course of time. I'd like to thank here, before I move on, I'd like to thank Alice Riley Michaelbust, who is in another room in the building here. She is my colleague who, in both 2015 and 2018, helped coordinate the National College Health Assessment Administration across the UW system. So Regent Stanford Taylor was talking about the youth risk behavior surveys on a 2-year cycle in Wisconsin. We're on a 3-year cycle with this National College Health Assessment. We try to administer it at the system level so that we can have benchmarks against national data and compare ourselves, and then each campus gets a report as well. So what do our students tell us about depression? So what we see here is that in 2015, the gray bar on the left, about 33% of our students said that they felt so depressed it was difficult to function at least once in the last 12 months. Okay, pretty significant portion, a third. In just 3 years, it's gone up to 41% of our students saying that they felt so depressed it was difficult to function. So this isn't that diagnostic slide. This is really just about, I've had these feelings at times and they've overwhelmed me. Okay, this is the percentage of students who report being diagnosed or treated. And you see here again that the percentage of students has gone up, this time from 16 to 23, and that we exceed the national average on this statistic. What's remarkable about that is that the national average for this has been trending upward. This shows just over the last 8 years. So this is that 18% on the bottom slide. We've reached that in 2018, but it was only 10% nationally in 2010. So this is not just Wisconsin. This is nationally that these things are trending. And it's been going on for a decade at least, and maybe more. So the next category we said we would talk about, and feel free to ask questions at any time. I don't mind being interrupted. I'll try to see you if you raise your hand. But I want to just talk a little bit then about anxiety. So the next most common issue is anxiety, and actually this has leapfrogged depression and become the most common amongst our college students at least. Now again, many of us have experiences of feeling anxious. I was feeling pretty anxious preparing for this presentation. I'm actually doing okay right now. I got a little dry mouth, but I'm doing okay, right? But think about this. We all need a little bit of anxiety to motivate ourselves, right? We need stress, like Sandy was saying. We're not trying to take all stress away. But think about if I were to have a panic attack right now. I would be unable to speak. I would shut down. I would affect the whole proceedings, and I would pass this on to Eric or somebody to do the rest of the presentation. I could be overwhelmed in this moment, right? So we all have anxiety at times, but again, to reach the threshold here for a disorder, it has to have that significant impact on one's daily activities. And when you think about some of the symptoms of depression and anxiety, here we talk about feelings of worry, anxiety, or fear. There's other things that really impact student success when you drill down to what some of the symptoms are. There's usually sleep problems. There's concentration problems. There's problems with energy, tiredness. And if you think about just those three even, how much that would impact our ability to do our work, students' ability to focus. These are why these are such big deals for our students. So again, I'm just going to show two questions related to anxiety on the National College Health Assessment. The first is, ask students, have they felt overwhelming anxiety at any point in the last 12 months? So in 2015, that was nearly 60% of our students say at least one time they felt overwhelming anxiety. So maybe they had that panic attack in front of the Board of Regents and they couldn't go on with their presentation.
You're gonna talk yourself into this.
I know, I'm working on that. But look how far it went up again in just 3 years. We have almost 2/3 of our students now saying that they've had that experience at least once. And here's the 27% that was on the other slide. Now we have over a quarter of our students saying they've been diagnosed or treated with some anxiety disorder. Now that's a category of disorder, so there is more than one. But that's over a quarter of our students are saying they've been diagnosed or treated by some professional with anxiety. And again, this has been trending upward as well. So just look at that national trend from 2010 to 2018. It's grown quite a bit on the national level. So we seem to be exceeding this right now in Wisconsin. You know, 2 years or two kind of different administrations don't necessarily make a consistent trend line. We'll have to look at this over time. But what we're seeing right now seems to be that we're a little worse off.
What about the intersection with drugs and alcohol
Yeah.
resulting over time in driving this?
Right, so the survey actually assesses a lot of alcohol drug issues as well, and we're not presenting that today. A couple of trends that I know are happening is our college students, there's kind of this bimodal thing going on. There's more students coming to college that report that they abstain. We're inheriting that from high schools, thankfully. They're getting good drug and alcohol education, so they're choosing not to drink, but we still, as a state and as a UW system, have higher numbers of students that choose to drink at high-risk levels, too. Your question about the intersection, the survey itself doesn't answer that. We would have to do secondary analysis to see, you know, how much the stress in alcohol. Do I have an instinct? Absolutely. For some students, drugs or alcohol is the way to cope with mental health issues, and so then they start piling problems on top of one another. And I know that anecdotally from lots of years of doing therapy with students that is often the case. Yeah. It's not the only reason students drink, and the majority of our students, when they drink, they're not going to develop problem drinking patterns, and they maybe don't have mental health problems. But if they do, it adds complexity to their problems. Yeah.
In order to better understand this, can you define a system student? Are you primarily talking about undergraduates? Seems to me very different if someone's a medical student or working on an MBA or a researcher.
Right. This survey is administered to all campus-based students. It is not administered to online students, and we made that decision. But we did make a decision to include graduate students because some campuses have significant portions of graduate students, so they wanted to be able to break out that data.
And is there a distinction in the data in terms of anxiety and depression among freshmen versus upperclassmen?
We haven't done that breakdown, so I would only be speculating regarding that.
Do you have an instinct as
Well,
well?
my instinct from directing a counseling center for 13 years is that surprisingly, it's pretty level across years. So in terms of like students who seek help at our counseling centers across campuses, some would say, well, it's got to be freshmen, right, when they're brand new, or it's got to be sophomores when they're making that major decision. It's really not. It's pretty balanced. And on our campus, we have a fair number of non-traditional students, and sometimes we were seeing more of them. We were seeing more non-traditional age students. So it kind of just depends.
Regent Delgado.
Yeah.
I have a sense that we tend to over-medicate. Okay, when you tell me 80% need drugs, I was saying that's almost everybody here.
I hope I didn't say that.
Did you say that? Oh, I kind of heard it. It goes like this, in particular the guy next to me. The issue here
Drugs because of him.
is that, are we focusing on coping mechanisms and
Absolutely.
handling things? I mean, like, how about cigars? You know, about cigars. That's not a joke, by the way. It's a great way to calm yourself down.
Yes, we are focusing on coping mechanisms, and that, yes. So, I mean, I won't editorialize on over-medicating. I'm trained as a psychologist. I can't prescribe medication, so I'm all about helping students build coping skills, build resilience skills, and the tiers that Sandy showed earlier are really all about that too. We're trying to, you know, if we're going to educate the whole student, we are really trying to build life skills for students, right? Not just educate in the classroom, but build life skills that will help them in the workplace, that will help them in relationships and throughout their life.
Regent Atwell.
What's the availability of really talented, trained people to, if the problem's growing, we're putting more resources to it, can we find the people that can actually do the work and do it well?
Yeah, that varies by location. I would say that lots of people like to work at university counseling centers, so it hasn't always been a challenge for us to recruit. Where we struggle more in Menominee, Wisconsin is finding referrals in the community. And there are a lot of pockets of Wisconsin that are underserved in terms of mental health professionals. And we're one of them, actually, in Dunn County. But yeah, that is a problem. What's really a problem is finding counselors, is finding psychiatrists. So the people who can prescribe in those appropriate situations, it's hard to find those folks because, and that's true nationwide. Madison's probably really well resourced. Milwaukee probably is, but most of our rural areas are not, and we struggle to find those folks.
Actually, Madison is because we have the highest prevalence of anxiety medication of almost any city ours.
I wouldn't doubt that.
Any other questions, Regents?
I'm sure you're going to have more because my next slides are even better. Okay. Yeah.
To Regent Delgado's point.
Yeah.
When I was in New York 10 years ago, survey we did of students, 43% of freshmen coming in were on a psychotropic drug.
Yeah.
43%. I didn't believe it. And so that was a, whoa. And when you break that down, the more affluent the student, the more likely that was the case.
Right.
Yeah. I think you're nobody unless you're on drugs.
Right.
You know, some of these kids just, you know, they know fairly well.
Yep. So part of that, and I'll get to resources in a minute, but we are sort of pushing down the effort to prescribe medications to the primary care level because of the lack of psychiatrists. And so primary care professionals have a lot to keep track of, and so they're not mental health professionals, and some would say that maybe we're getting a little bit too free with medications, but that's a open question. Yeah. All right, so the next topic I'm going to talk about is the heaviest one, but it's important for us to talk about because it does impact our campuses, and when it occurs, this really takes a lot of time from staff, and it's not just counseling and health services staff. When there are people who are at risk for suicide, we pay attention and we bring resources to bear when we're aware of it. So just a little bit of definitional things. So suicidal thoughts often arise when a person is feeling helpless or hopeless. So think about it as someone feeling like their emotional distress exceeds their ability or their perceived ability to cope, and they start to feel like taking their own life is really the only answer. Self-harm behaviors also tend to happen at really high levels of distress. And I would think of these as really unhealthy coping mechanisms. They can be dangerous, but they're often not suicidal in intent, but they can be dangerous. And this would be like cutting or burning or beating on oneself in some way. This, for a student who's doing this, it tends to serve as a distraction or a way to release tension, or maybe even a way to punish themselves because they're not feeling good about themselves, right? So when we become aware of these things, and we try more and more to help people be aware and ask the right questions to become aware of these things, this consumes a lot of time. It consumes time from our crisis services, our housing staff, our campus police, but also faculty and staff when they're having conversations. And you see there that 1,000 suicides on college campuses occur each year. You might have read the CDC media reports last summer that came out that said suicide is increasing nationwide in the last decade or so. So this is something that college students bring to us too. To the extent that the NCHA survey speaks to this, and these are some sobering numbers here. So reports of suicidal thoughts, self-harm behaviors, and suicide attempts have all risen again between 2015 and 2018. And currently look like they exceed our national peers. I like to personalize this one a little bit because it is so it's sobering and important. So if we look at 13% of students in 2018 and extrapolate across the UW system, that would be about 22,000 students who told us that they seriously considered suicide. They told us in a survey. We don't capture all those students, but more and more we hope that we do so that we can get them help before things turn into a tragedy. But look how many also attempt suicide. So 2.1% might seem like a small percent, but across the UW system, that is approximately 3,700 students Okay? Per year, this is not just per lifetime, this is per year. In the last 12 months, they said they attempted suicide. This is where our behavior intervention teams, if we have a suicide threat or an attempt, we're intervening. But I don't think we're capturing all those students. In fact, I know we're not. So some of these are students who have, they're suffering in silence. They're perhaps overdosing in their room. They're waking up the next morning, they're not feeling great, but they don't tell anybody. These are the reasons why we do gatekeeper trainings and we really try to increase awareness and referrals, right? There is one piece of good news in the suicide data on college campuses. It's not from the NCHA survey, but population statistics, the best that we have, would suggest that suicide rates, so completed suicide, is half the amount on college campuses as it is for age-matched peers in the community. So if you take a group of 18 to 24-year-olds at college, compare them to a group of 18 to 24-year-olds, the average ages, in the community who aren't attending college, you have half the suicide rate for college students. So what we believe is that the resources we have and the campus environment, the structure, creates a protective factor for suicide. Questions about that at all? All right.
Any questions?
So the big question, right, is why do we care? And it's already been kind of asked here, should we have a role in this and what should that role be, right? To me, the reason to care, one of the many reasons to care is this does impact students academically. So the NCHA survey asks about the things that impact or interfere most with academics. And interference was defined as receiving a lower grade on a test or exam or a project, receiving a lower grade in a course, having to take it incomplete or drop a course. So it was defined as impact. And notice the things that are highlighted directly are mental health issues. These are the top reasons students report. And I would argue that all of the things on this list, with maybe the exception of cold, flu, and sore throat, are things that contribute to stress. Sleep difficulties certainly do. Work problems, family member issues, relationship issues, and we've already talked about technology also. So these are the things that students experience. So we are going to talk a little bit about the resources that we have, what we have, and how they're able to keep up. So when students on our campuses are looking for help, they have a couple places to go. Most commonly, it would be their counseling center or their health service. Sometimes those are combined services. We've been tracking over time the percentage of students that utilize counseling services. So what I'm going to show you first is a trend line for UW system enrollment since 2010. Roughly in 2018, our enrollment was 2.5% less across the whole system than it was in 2010. The numbers of students seeking counseling over that same time period has grown by 55%. So despite, and even on some campuses with some enrollment declines have seen these increases. So the average is 55% across our campuses of growth in students seeking counseling services. And this last trend line is counselors. So we have had some staff increases. We've only been tracking that since 2014, and you can see that we've had about a 19% increase. Actually, Madison contributes to a significant portion of this. They added 6 counselors last year, but even at 19%, you can see it doesn't quite match the growth in the number of students seeking counseling. So what has happened here, I mean, the good news part of this slide to me is that students are seeking help. And seeking help in increasing numbers, we shouldn't be surprised when we just saw the depression anxiety data increasing that there are going to be more students and also accessing services. But we're not able to meet their needs in the same way we used to be able to. So this results in poorer access, longer wait times, and less service. More waits between appointments, for instance. More priority given to the crisis or the urgent student, and less help given to the student who we might be able to help with just a few sessions because they're having to wait for a long period of time. I wanted to pause on this slide because this is really speaks to, yes?
John, in our last session, we talked about maybe changing the mix of the counselors that are available, maybe having some younger people maybe more tech savvy or having better relationships with students. You know, I'm an old guy, so I can say this, I suppose. But is that part of the mix, and are we looking at that in terms of how we can make the reach out to students in the most effective way?
Yeah. So we have really great counseling staff across the system. And I can tell you that what you're saying is on the minds of their directors when they have staff openings. They're trying to think about what are the ways we can best fill these needs to meet the unique needs of our campus, as Regent Delgado was saying earlier. So that's diversifying their staff in different ways to match the student body. But it can also be, yes, adding a range of new, young and older counselors. Yeah, for sure. And youth does bring some creativity. I mean, when Facebook came out, I was not the one who was going to figure out how to use that to our benefit, but I had a staff person who was able to do that, right? And now it's not even Facebook, I know. Instagram, Snapchat, it's everything else. I know.
John, we had one other question. Regent Ring.
I should have asked this question a couple slides ago, but can you walk us through the process of how our institutions, or maybe you could speak on Parkside or maybe Green Bay, Stout, but can you walk us through the process of how our institutions deal with students who attempt suicide, and what do our institutions do to help?
I'll go ahead and start, and we can add to it. So one, it depends on where we find out about it. So if we find out through the counseling center, if the student has made it to the counseling center and has expressed that they've attempted suicide, or we find out, then our counseling center works with our police department if they determine that the student is still a threat to themselves. And the police would transport the student to a local emergency room, where they would then determine whether or not that student needed hospitalization. The officer stays with the student until a bed is found available for the student, whether it's at that hospital or at another hospital. And so there's that transporting and that time that's spent with the officer and the student. Kind of on the back end, if they are hospitalized and then released, then that's where our BIT teams, our dean of students would come in, our residence life staff, if they happen to live on campus. And we would develop, as they're coming back to campus, kind of a plan for what are they going to do to make sure that they're maintaining the supports that they need. Is it appropriate for them to return to the residence halls? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Are the parents involved, or are other family members involved? And we have the ability to reach out to family members in those emergency situations. Even though we have FERPA, there are ways that we reach out. Sometimes the family members are supportive, and that's a good thing, and they provide the support, and maybe they take them home and they're able to continue their studies, but they live at home. Other times the family may not be the best support for the students, and so then we're making sure that they're connecting through our health center, our counseling center. We're communicating, the Dean of Students Office is communicating with faculty and staff, and the faculty to let them know that students are going to be out for a period of time. Please work with them when they get back to campus. If it's a long term, we may be working with faculty to determine, have they been in class long enough to get an incomplete for the semester, so that they come back later and are able to finish their academics. Or maybe they haven't been in courses long enough for the semester, but we're able to do a medical withdrawal. And so those are some of the highlights. There may be other.
Yeah, I would say that's almost exactly what we do. We work with the student and the family to put together a plan for their success. So academic, social, personal, the whole thing, but we don't just let them go. We absolutely take care of them.
Yep. Regent Jones.
Could I ask, is there a correlation between weak academic performance and increased levels of stress or depression?
Yes.
Yeah. A vicious cycle.
Yeah. Right.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask then a follow-up. What are the other drivers of stress in a student's life? Is that the primary driver of stress?
Kind of a chicken and egg question.
Yeah. Well, on the global level, right, without getting down to the individual student, it is those three things I mentioned. That's what the national research would show: economic, safety, and technology. Certainly there are other stressors, right? I think family plays a big role for a number of our students in creating stress for them. there's a lot of things that go into
Balancing work and their
Yeah.
academics, the time that they're in.
All right. So briefly, I'm just going to share what counseling services standards are for numbers of counselors. And this is from the International Association of Counseling Services, sets a standard of one FTE counselor to every 1,000 or 1,500 students. There was a mental health task force in the UW system after Virginia Tech, and they looked at this and saw that counseling centers right then were at 1 to 2,000 to 1 to 2,500. You just saw a slide where we have improved from there, but we are not quite at that range. That standard actually is being reassessed by that agency because it really varies campus to campus. Some campuses have higher percentages of their students seeking help and therefore demand. So that 1 to 1,000 is really just kind of a one arbitrary marker to look at, and at least trying to achieve that is what most of our campuses have been trying to do. Health services. I mentioned that the other place that students will often present, sometimes it's the first place they go, is to a medical provider. So they do go looking for medication or asking about medication. Our medical providers, what we're finding, and this has already been mentioned, is that we're getting increased visits to health services for behavioral health issues, but the staff equipped to handle them is hard to find. The psychiatrists or psychiatric nurse practitioners increasingly are who we contract with on our campuses. Some have better availability than others, depending on where they're located. But when there's not enough staff time with them, then those visits get pushed to primary care. And so a lot of our psychotropic medications for students with anxiety and depression are prescribed by our primary care professionals, which then leaves fewer appointments for other types of primary care visits that students come for. And then the last thing that I'm going to share is the impact on our disability services. And this is another slide from the NCHA. What's depicted here is 8-year trends for the most common categories of disabilities reported by students. Okay? Something for which they might go to a disability services office to seek accommodations. And what you can see here is a pretty striking trend line with psychiatric conditions. You see that it starts down toward the bottom in 2010 and has now become the most common. It's the #1 category of disabilities accommodated by our disability services. We collect data on this in the UW systems. The UW system annual report of disability services, the last one that I saw, said it was around 25% of their caseloads were students with psychological or psychiatric disabilities. This is even more true for our veterans, and it's about half of the student veterans who seek disability services assistance do so for a psychological condition. And they might do so for more than one. These aren't mutually exclusive, but it just gives you a sense of the scope and how much the landscape has changed for our disability services professionals. What they used to be accommodating has changed a lot in the last just decade. So I think that's it for me. Transition? All right. So now we want to move from kind of this national and system-wide look.
Region Whitbread, go ahead.
Go ahead.
And I know this is a difficult space to respond to, but we're doing better. We're investing more. We have greater sensitivity to the challenges, except we have 26 campuses. And to suggest that we've got even playing field in terms of success across all of the campuses would be counterintuitive. Right? So the question to the president, Ray, is if we have gaps, doing well over here, not so well over here, great at Oshkosh, not so cool at Eau Claire, whose job is it in your world to get it cranked up? Where does that lie?
One of the things that I think will be an outgrowth of this effort is a better understanding of where those gaps are. And they differ at Superior from Madison, from Parkside, as you rightly pointed out. Obviously, the responsibility for trying to deal with this is an understanding of the pyramid from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3, what do we really need? And I think that will be an outgrowth of the next step on this, an assessment of where those gaps are. So it's hard for me to say, obviously, ultimately, the buck stops here. But also, the chancellors are very concerned about this, because so much of this contributes to retention and student graduation and success. When I was in the Washington, D.C., Congressman Gallagher, one of the first questions he asked us, what is creating so much stress on college campuses? Whoa, where'd this come from? He's keenly aware of that.
Bridget Mueller.
Thank you. To follow up on that gap question, and your preceding slide is on health services, where by default many students go. Are health services offices funded with sort of system or general purpose revenue funds, or are they funded with student fees?
Probably varies by campus. On
Real
our
mix.
campus, it would be student fees.
So that
Student
too
fees
is
and-
variable.
Mhm.
It is.
Yep, it is.
Exactly.
Regents, other questions? Go ahead, Chancellor Blank.
So I actually think the wrong question is which campus is doing well and which are doing poorly. I'll be honest, I think all our campuses are not doing what we need to be doing in this area. All of us are running behind in terms of the number of counselors, the number of people we can see, how quickly we can see them. It's not unique to Wisconsin, it's true across the country. And thinking that this is a problem that only some of the schools have, I think is probably misinformation.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you so much.
Regent Tyler.
I can't leave my calculator alone today, but, I look at their recommendation of 1,000 to 1,500 students, and then you look at the percentages on depression. It says you've got 512 students to deal with, anxiety, you've got 812 to deal with, and suicide or harming themselves, you've got 162, and I look at, I don't see how even if you got to these numbers that you can deal with that population of, I assume it takes more than an hour to deal with somebody that's challenged with suicidal thoughts. So, I appreciate the information, and it's scary. When you look at, even if we hit what they say the minimum is, the challenges is, I don't know how a person could deal with it.
Sandy referenced that earlier. We likely won't staff our way out of this problem. We do need more staff, but all of our centers are tasked with establishing their scope of care and then figuring out where some issues are just beyond what they can provide services for and making referrals. And that too varies by campus and local, circumstances, but that's a very good point.
Two quick questions. Regent Klein, you're first.
Yes, with the way we're staffing, have we thought about telepsychiatry at all? And second, are you certain that we are equipped for a student that's dangerous to themselves or others, that we're handling that in a uniform and consistent way, and that we're doing so in a way that protects us and or anybody around?
Yes, I think in regards to the first question, you'll see a slide near the end where we talk about things that may be helpful going forward, and one of those is telehealth, right? That is something that, not saying it should happen, it should be explored. In terms of the students who are a potential threat to others, again, many of us in our behavior intervention team training have had training at the national level in threat assessment. That said, I want you to know, none of us can predict human behavior. So we have some great strategies, and we are looking at those things, and we are in so much better shape than we were 10 years ago, to be really honest, and we're in better shape than we even were 5 years ago because of the level of training that we've had. Some of that training, gratefully, has been provided at the system level, to be quite honest, and many of us are members of the National Threat Assessment Associations. So we get that kind of data, and we share it willingly with each other. So I think, short of being able to be psychics and predict human behavior, I think we are doing everything we can to identify who are the students who may be most at risk for concerns to others. Yes.
Thank you. Regent Tiedemann.
I'd like to begin with by thanking each of you for being here today. Ultimately, I imagine that your metric of success will be a decline in the number of suicides and the number of academic interruptions due to mental health, behavioral health issues. But but the intermediate indicators would be the number of resolved cases, the number of engagements that you have, the number of referrals. What is your definition of a resolved case, or is there such a thing as a resolved case?
Are you speaking in terms of those most serious ones where there might be threat to self, or are you speaking in terms of a student with depression, anxiety who seeks services?
Both.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of a student who seeks help for depression or anxiety, our counseling centers are measuring with a standardized assessment instrument. Actually, every center in the system uses the same one because we participate in a national study. So we actually are looking at change over time, and that's part of how we decide resolution. I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, but that's part of how we define resolutions, and physicians do similar types of things. They do assessments on the front end, and they do it over time to look for resolution. You mentioned a lot of the other things, I think, for the more at-risk student. I mean, we're hoping that they can persist. We're hoping that they have fewer interruptions. We're hoping ultimately that they can graduate and be successful in life.
Sometimes, though, I do think it's important to add, we do help a student and their family understand it is not in their best interest to stay in school right now. That is our reality. That's not the majority of our students, but there are some students who just don't have the skill set at that time, the coping skill set to remain in school. We help them transition out and hope we can help them transition back. But in that particular moment, not staying enrolled is their best option, or perhaps considering online education, right, as an alternative.
Last question, Regent Atwell.
So you have a 20-year-old student presents, marginal case or pretty clear case of suicidal tendencies, self-reported. What are the restrictions on your ability to engage the family? How do you sort through that?
We actually, FERPA allows for a health or safety emergency, and it can be interpreted by the institution. FERPA is a permissive law, and so almost always, unless there's a reason to believe that that student might be at risk for safety in the home, which sometimes does happen, we always have that option. And I would say on our campus, much of the time, we engage with parents.
Parents are a very important part of it.
Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
always.
And I think our first step is to work with the student to see, oftentimes the first question that's happening in the health center is, can we contact your, we feel that you need to be transported. Do you want us to contact your parents? So that we're asking their permission first. But if they don't give us, if they don't grant that permission and we believe that it's in their best interest, we're reaching out. So there are very few times when we wouldn't make that contact, and that's just because we believe that
safety is.
there's a reason to make it worse. Yeah, exactly.
Let's do this. We're over our time limit, but this is such an important issue that I didn't want to cut any of the discussion off. And know that as I'm the outgoing president, know that I do recommend to my board members that this is such an important item to put it on your agenda for future meetings. So as part of a wrap up, President Cross, I know you have a couple words as well.
One of the things that I think is interesting about, Tracy asked a question, Regent Klein, sorry. The services vary by community and county, and when Chancellor Blank was commenting about all of us need to do a better job of this, I didn't hear Regent Milner's comment earlier about Madison. I was trying to listen to that. Too many of these counties, cities, municipalities don't have adequate psychiatric help for some of the students that at that end of that spectrum that need help. And that's the part of the challenge. To whom do we refer these folks? To give you an example, this was not one of our students, but in Douglas County, I was talking to the county exec, and he was begging us in Superior to partner with them to provide these services because insurance funds would pay for a lot of that, and if you needed, you could benefit. He was spending over $600,000 out of his budget annually for one individual because they had to be transported elsewhere. He said, it's killing my budget. My point here is the problems of the state of Wisconsin are our problems too. What is our role, not only in reducing these problems on our campuses, but in our communities? Is there a partnership that could emerge where needed, where appropriate, the gaps that Regent Whitmer was talking about? And what should we be doing? And those are the kinds of things that going forward, I think we have to explore.
Thank you, President Cross. At this time, we're going to go ahead and excuse this group of presenters. Next, we're going to have our student panelists come up. But before we let these panelists go, let's give our 4 panelists.
While the students are coming up, you'll notice that we have 3 individuals who identify as female, and we wanted to make sure that there wasn't an impression left that only females struggle with mental health issues or are concerned about this topic. It just worked out this way, and in fact, the data would show that men and women actually think about suicide at the same rates. So we thought that was really important to mention so that there's no inferences drawn today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our students who are going to introduce themselves and share their stories.
Thank you.
I will start off. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mansi Mohan, and I'm currently a senior here at UW-Madison. For the past 2 years, I've served as a student representative on our Healthcare Advisory Committee, which is our shared governance group for our University Health Services, or UHS. Through this position, as well as my seat on Vice Chancellor Reeser's Cabinet of Student Leaders, I've been involved in our mental health campaign this year from the very beginning. I have a mental health story of my own, and so my stake in this issue is personal. After several counseling sessions at UHS my sophomore year, I still didn't feel very comfortable talking with my provider, and this meant I wasn't really making any progress. I realized that this was partly because my provider, through no fault of their own, didn't really understand what it meant to be a person of color at this predominantly white institution. And so when I tried to find a provider who looked like me, who understood the way that I exist and move around this campus, I unfortunately couldn't find anyone. Through conversations with friends, classmates, and colleagues, I discovered that this disconnect and this lack of representation was causing problems for a lot of other students of color seeking care. And that's why I applied for my seat on the Healthcare Advisory Committee in the first place, was to share the concerns of so many students who shared my struggles and raise this issue with the people who have the power to change things. So what we need at UW-Madison is a provider base that reflects our increasing diversity. All students need mental health providers who look like them, who they feel comfortable sharing their experiences with and talking with. And so in that vein, students of color need providers of color who understand our cultures and who have dealt with systemic racial issues and know how to cope with them. And while I cannot represent all the minority communities on our campus, I know that we also need more providers who are queer and trans competent, who speak the native languages of our international students, and who understand the experiences of first-generation, low-income students as well. Over my 4 years on campus, I've seen great efforts by UW-Madison to reduce the stigma around mental health, as we talked about earlier. And this has been nothing but positive for folks who are struggling with different mental health challenges. As we saw in the data, students now are much more likely to seek help when they need it. This also means that UHS needs to be able to grow to keep up with the increasing demand for services. Students are worried particularly about wait times to get an appointment with a counselor, and this affects not only their health but also their academic performance, as we've discussed today. I know people who, by the time they got an appointment, their condition had deteriorated and prevented them from finishing homework or participating in classes. I also know people who tried to circumvent this problem by taking the earliest available appointment, and that could have caused them to miss a class. So our student campaign this year is researching ways to solve this problem, looking at how to hire and retain more staff, extend hours of operation, and find alternatives to one-on-one counseling. Students have come together on this issue from across disciplines and campus affiliations because the challenges that we face are so universal. Whether it's a diagnosed condition, such as depression or anxiety, or a different stressor that comes with life as a college student, mental health challenges can affect any of us at any time. At the UHS budget decision meeting in February, we heard almost an hour's worth of testimony from a diverse group of students who told personal stories of panic, hopelessness, and shame. One particularly brave student shared his story at the end and said that if it weren't for the mental health services that UHS provides, that they might have taken their own life. And so these stories are the reason that I got involved in mental health advocacy on campus. As students, we're here to learn and succeed academically, but in order to do that, we first have to be healthy. And I'm thrilled about the number of students who have joined our cause, who continue to join us in spreading awareness about representation in mental health services. With so many student voices and minds working together, I know we're going to make some real progress, and I'm honored to be here today to speak in front of you all on their behalf, on behalf of students of color, and on behalf of UW-Madison. Thank you.
Okay, I will go next. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sage Lefebvre. I'm a philosophy major at UWSP. I have minors in biology, chemistry, and sociology, and I have an intent to go to medical school. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you all for inviting me here today. I serve as the Health Services Student Director for UWSP Student Government, as well as the chair of the Student Health Advisory Committee. I'm here today to advocate for mental health resources that UWSP's Health Services and Counseling Center provides for our students. I'm also here today to be a voice for the students who aren't able to be present. The resources that our university offers students are crucial to student well-being, success, and retention. Behavioral health matters on UWSP's campus just as it matters on every campus, and it matters everywhere and in every space. The existence of mental illness and the topic of mental health still has a negative stigma, keeping people from normalizing how mental illness is integrated throughout daily life and preventing healthy discussion. To help explain how deeply impactful campus mental health resources are, I'd like to share with you an excerpt from a testimony written by a UWSP student. I asked my roommate, "Do you have a minute to talk?" That's how I would usually bring it up. I was going to tell him how I didn't feel like myself again. He was always there to listen to me, but this time he stopped me short and suggested that I see someone professional. It felt like he punched me in the gut. I thought, I don't need to go to counseling. I am not a weak person. He told me talking to friends just isn't the same as talking to a professional. He had been going to counseling services on campus for a couple months. I told him I would go. I didn't. Not at first. I went to classes, attended events, and hung out with friends, all while distracted by negative thoughts. I couldn't enjoy anything. It felt like my friends didn't see me. It felt like we were playing hide and seek, and they just decided to give up the search. It wasn't until I had a panic attack in class that I realized I couldn't fix this alone. Taking the elevator up to the third floor of Dalzell Hall was one of the scariest things I have done. The doors dinged open, and I scheduled an appointment. It was 3 weeks away. Those 3 weeks almost killed me. I was failing classes, pushing away friends, and consumed by horrible thoughts. I was secluded and disassociating from my life. My appointment felt like an eternity away. I don't ever want to experience that again. I was still terrified when I took that elevator again, but when the doors opened, I felt strong. Since that first day, I have gone every week. With the help of my counselor, I stopped hiding. I began seeking a positive outlook on life. I realize now that counseling doesn't show weakness. It is one of the most courageous things a person can do. I wouldn't be where I am today without it. This is just one student's story, but there are so many others, each having different experiences and each having different needs. I've included several other statements in your folders. I'm just asking you to take a look at them and read them when you have an opportunity to. These students were so brave to share their stories, and I'm so proud to call them my peers. We need mental health resources, and we need them to be bigger and better. Even with our decline in enrollment, the student demand for counseling services has continued to increase. In 2013-14, with more than 9,600 students on our campus, Counseling Center had 3,666 sessions. In 2017-18, with a student population of 8,146, the center had 3,680 sessions. In other words, we have fewer students and need for more sessions. Due to staff changes, wait times at our counseling center have gotten even longer. The counseling center staff has done their best to manage with the resources that they have to best serve our students, but it's a struggle. Typically, the number of students on the list for an appointment grows significantly throughout the semester, which only lengthens its time, the waitlist time. This past February 28th, the director of our counseling center shared that the waitlist was 25 students. By March 6th, the waitlist had grown of students requesting their first time appointment to around 45. At the end of the last semester, to put this in perspective, our counseling center waitlist had exceeded 80 students. There's something else that I just want to point out about UWSP. We have a fairly high number of non-traditional and first-generation college students. A lot of these students do not have health insurance of their own. A majority of the services provided by our counseling center and health services are available for free or at a significantly reduced cost. Without health insurance, if students seek care from community resources, the price that they pay is astronomical. Furthermore, there is a shortage of healthcare providers, especially mental health care providers in this region, which also impacts waiting periods in the community. Without access to university counseling centers or health services, a large portion of our UWSP students seeking care would not have a means of getting it at an affordable cost. The Dean of Students' office is always available to help students maximize their learning experience by creating a culture of care, fostering personal responsibility, and encouraging involvement as members of the campus and broader communities. At UWSP, we say, you matter and point cares. Life happens, challenges arise, and students have questions. It's an encouraging statement aiming to ensure that every student feels heard and is validated. It's our way of standing in solidarity with students so everyone has a community that supports them through every experience. In closing, better access to therapy sessions and shorter wait times will help show students that they matter and that we care. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. It is an honor to be here. My name is Anjali Holmes, and I am a senior at UW Parkside. I am also a veteran that served in the United States Coast Guard for 7 years. I would like to take this opportunity to thank President Ray Cross and Regent Tiedemann and all other veterans and military personnel present for their service. Once I started at Parkside, I pursued a job with Veteran Services as a student worker. That led me to participating in the Veteran Steering Committee and co-founding our veteran student organization, VETS, which stands for Veterans Evolving to Scholars, in 2017. I've had the pleasure to advocate for veterans on my campus and work with other veteran organizations across the system. I have worked closely with my administration on many veterans issues, including mental health. Being a veteran and a student, I can easily see the importance of having mental health professionals on staff who are aware of veteran needs. Veterans come to university with a unique perspective and particular sets of needs. We come with shared values that persist after our service. Our themes are loyalty, teamwork, leadership, and obedience. We use military time, we are disciplined, patriotic, and value subordination, ceremony, and cohesion. We live and function in this unique context, and that can affect the work between a counselor and a veteran. The increase in veterans' use of mental health services and the increase of student veterans enrollment nationally each year means that counselors must understand the various aspects of the military experience, including, but not limited to, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, transition issues, trauma, suicide risk assessment, and crisis on our campuses. Faculty and staff, especially staff in disability services, must be trained about military issues as well. Many veterans on campus are transitioning from being in the military to being civilians and non-traditional students. This transition is not easy, especially for veterans who had made the military a career, were injured, or released early. We question our own identity and our way of life because the structure in our military community is gone. Many of us come out with a disability rating, frequent VA appointments, and a family that is trying their hardest to support us, even when we don't know how to support ourselves. Mental health problems can arise when we start mentally processing the experiences we had while serving. This is common. On campus, we find ourselves in a new community that doesn't often seem to value what we do, and there is a lack of structure that we learn to appreciate and rely on. We are often treated like we are 18, but have lived a whole life outside of the university. It's disorienting for some, and for some it is too much. In August 2018, Parkside lost a student veteran to suicide. Mike was struggling with depression, anxiety, and physical medical issues. He had talked to his family, me, and some other friends about how he was struggling. He was worried about the stigma of receiving mental health care and was more concerned about what would happen if he didn't get the help he needed. One day he came over and talked to me about my depression, anxiety, and medical issues. He wanted to know how people treated me and what the VA is like in terms of helping someone, and if he should look elsewhere for care. We had a great discussion. He had already made an appointment to see a counselor at the VA, and he told me he was not suicidal. The problem is that he had to wait well over a month to get in. The closest VA mental health facilities that allow mental health walk-ins are about an hour away, and you can wait all day with no guarantee of being seen. I didn't know then how much he needed to be seen right away. If our school was equipped with a counselor in the counseling center who was educated on veteran needs, he would have gone there. I have no doubt in my mind. Mike was an incredible man. He was big and full of joy. He would help anyone at any time if he knew that they needed it. He led study groups. He was a friend to so many of us veterans and students, and was always trying to make things better for everyone around him. He spent a lot of time in our Military and Veterans Success Center and was cherished by everyone who frequented there. He became family. Unfortunately, he was struggling with something so deep and hidden that we couldn't get him the help that he needed. I made the mistake of thinking it was fine that he had to wait and that he would be okay. The saddest reality is that he is not and will not be the last veteran friend of mine who loses his or her life to suicide. The suicide rate for veterans is 1.5 times higher for veterans. It's 1.5 times higher for veterans than it is for civilians. The most recent VA National Suicide Data Report stated, to prevent veteran suicide, we must help reduce veterans' risk for suicide before they reach a crisis point and support those veterans who are in crisis. And this is the big part. This requires the expansion of treatment and prevention services and a continued focus on innovative crisis intervention services. It also requires effective networks of support, communication, and care across the communities where veterans live and work. A family member of Mike's told me at his memorial service that if it wasn't for the Veterans Center and the veteran community on our campus, that she didn't think he would have lived as long as he had. That we meant a lot to him. If only he knew how much he meant to us. I deal with major depression, anxiety, and other mental health illnesses. I am also 70% disabled due to my time in my service. I was medically retired. Due to an injury and overnight, my way of living was no longer an option. I moved to Kenosha and have had to rebuild who I am, and I still am. My identity was shattered. Going back to school was not easy. I didn't know where I fit in and still feel a little out of place. When I started school, I was homeless, still very unstable medically, and had a 2-person support system. I felt isolated, alone, and was in crisis. The only reason I started school when I did was because I needed the GI Bill money to live off of. Luckily, I was helped by the VA in time before my depression got worse. I had no choice but to wait, just like Mike did. That was one of the darkest periods of my life. I was fortunate enough to have 2 friends who kept an eye on me and would take me to the VA to receive care or take me to the emergency room. If Parkside had a trained counselor in the counseling center who understood my experience, I would have gone there. Seeing a counselor who has no understanding of my military experience is worse than not seeking help. I've experienced this firsthand. Instead, I tried to cope on my own, and it turned my crisis into trauma. My story and Mike's story are not unique compared to other student veterans. They are familiar, and some face many other obstacles as well. Student veterans who are supported in their institution are successful in the classroom and generally get a higher GPA compared to the other adult learners. If you're questioning why you should care, I ask that you think of Mike, myself, other veteran students, and the two ladies sitting next to me. I am hopeful we can improve and very honored to be a part of this presentation. Thank you.
We have one more presenter, but before Provost Morgan talks just about how these issues surface in the classroom, these are three incredibly brave students who I think we can all agree we are so proud that they're part of this system, and they accepted this opportunity and invitation, and so their courage is just admirable. And I already told all three of them I'm sure they can work somewhere on our campuses when they graduate if they want to. So thank you again. And now our final presenter is our provost from UW-La Crosse, Betsy Morgan.
Nice to see you all. Before I became a professional emailer, becoming a provost, I was 20 years as a faculty member in the psychology department. I'm a social psychologist by training. I come from a long line of loving, smart, and successful people, many of whom have had serotonin disorders. I have named after my Aunt Betsy, who passed this last year, who had OCD, and had she lived at a different time, she would have had a much less painful life by access to modern psychotropics. So I take this both professionally and personally seriously, and I think we all know we just heard from the most extraordinary people who we need to hear more from. Just a couple of brief things about faculty and the experiencing of the increased demands on our time. I want to make it very clear that the vast majority of faculty, what makes them great is they are committed to student success, and it's challenging and painful to have students who are in mental distress. It's also true that it does increase our workload. So the very issue of how do we do the whatever kind of an appropriate, reasonable accommodation it is, we spend more time doing things like trying to parse out, is it a reasonable, excuse me the word, but excuse why a student might not want to come. If they say, I don't feel like coming to class today, well, what does that mean if you have a diagnosed mental disorder, or are you logged officially in with our disability services? Mostly, though, I think what I want you to think about, and why is this so important to higher ed, because you've heard the students talk about the wait time. You know, it's painful to wait 3 weeks for something in your lifetime, but 3 weeks out of a 15-week semester kills your GPA. It can kill an individual assignment. You can't go to lab classes. You aren't a participant in discussions in a literature class, the very kinds of things. So when you think about overall retention, I want you to think about persistence retention, but more importantly, I want you to shrink it down even smaller and say, in any particular class, any particular assignment, the mental distress, not having the sort of treatment it might need, can really affect how a student thrives in that situation. And of course, there is true that all of my faculty talk more about the fear than they ever used to, the fear of a very rare but present potential danger from a student. And you know, we're all aware of school shootings. It doesn't matter what age you are and whether it's in higher ed or not. But mostly we're just not qualified. We get PhDs to teach students in whatever it is that their field is, philosophy, biochemistry, women's studies. We don't get trained to be mental health professionals. So we need to feel like when we refer a student, they're going to get the help they need. And that's really what we need as faculty. So that will conclude my remarks.
Two final thoughts to leave you with. The first is that we do know, and this is impact from UW system data, that when students, when we can intervene in a timely fashion, that when students do engage with counseling, that counseling helps them persist. One of the things the national research would show that even in the most severe psychological problems with some students or with individuals, that the rates of recovery are high when the interventions are timely. And so that's what's critically important for us to think about, and that the status quo is really a barrier to mental health wellness. Concluding with the tier model that we started with, and now what we are including there is just some potential avenues to explore. I would highlight in tier 2, just to give you an example and to follow up on what Provost Morgan said. Last week was spring break at UW Stout when faculty are not under contract, and our director of our Teaching and Learning Center had set up a webinar, not realizing it was spring break, national webinar for people to attend, faculty to attend on responding to crisis in the classroom. It was, and she asked John and I to facilitate a discussion afterward with our faculty. Again, it was spring break, the middle of spring break, and we had 50 faculty and staff in attendance during spring break. I think that speaks to how much the need exists to be able to equip everyone, faculty, staff, and peers for these students with how to respond to individuals who may be in distress or in crisis. So there's some other examples there of things for us to consider as we move forward. As President Cross said, we hope this is just starting the conversation, not ending it, because we believe that there's great potential going forward.
Thank you, Sandy. At this time, we're going to excuse me, Regent Hall.
Sorry, I just have one comment. First of all, just thank you for your courage to share with us. I think this is also an opportunity for a K through 16 collaboration around mental health because, you know, as we heard earlier, I mean, students are coming to the university from different settings. And I think often about some of the students who have witnessed violence in elementary, middle, and high school. And we don't have a lot of interventions at that time, and they're carrying this and then coming to the colleges, you know. So I just, again, want us to be thinking K through 16 when we speak about the mental illness for faculty as well. So.
Thank you, Regent Hall. Regents, any other questions? Regent Klein.
And I'm sorry to take too much time, but you know, I don't know if we're doing worse than peer group. Probably we're doing about the same, but my overwhelming feeling is we can do better. And I would just remind us all that we have 174,000 students across the state. We have a world-class healthcare institution right here in the city. And it seems to me we ought to challenge ourselves because you know, whether it's telehealth, whether it's, you know, a redo, but whether it's financing vehicles. I remember being a student and thinking our healthcare services were not very good. Fortunately, maybe most students are at an age where they don't have a lot of health problems. And, you know, but I'm certain many, as you've described, do have behavioral health issues that can be addressed. You know, we should be the best on this. We shouldn't be okay. And I think, you know, this is a very moving presentation. It's something we could put a task force together and we could really look at what we're doing. Because I'm guessing we're not using our dollars well or our students' dollars well in this service that we have to be and must be providing. So I think we have to continue the conversation. But I would hope that administration would look at creating some sort of task force that we could bring to bear the many resources, School of Public Health that we have in Milwaukee, to say, how do we do this? It isn't the same old, same old. So that's it. Sorry.
Thank you, Regent Klein. Any other Regent questions? If not, President Cross, I know you have a few remarks.
Well, I want to say thank you to Sandy and the student affairs officers that are here. Would you stand up? You guys put this together, and I just want to say thank you for doing that. Chris Navia, we gave you guys a hard time putting this together, so thank you. I want to say thank you to the students. Not only were you courageous, you were eloquent, so thank you.
Yes.
And serve Los Angeles. So, the challenges you face, you put people to the data we've looked at. And it was important to see faces, not just numbers. So thanks for doing that. It's incredibly helpful. And Betsy, I'm not sure, well, I'm kidding, but thanks. Your background in classroom activity is really important. So thanks to each of you for doing it. We allocated 90 minutes for this, and thanks to the board for taking the time to listen to these issues and help us find ways maybe to put together a task force. Good idea, by the way. How do we become, I liked your line, I know it's a commercial line, it's not just okay. Who does that? Is that Verizon? Somebody who does that. It's not just okay, that we want to be really good at this because your lives are important, as are those of your peers. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and excuse this set of panelists, and Sandy, I think you have a couple more coming up yet.
Oh, if there's still time, do you want, it was just for more questions, that was it, so.
Let's do that quick.
Okay, so Harry Anderson is coming up from UW Superior. Tammy McGuckin will come back, Eric Arneson from Green Bay, and we can take specific questions you may have about campuses, our individual campuses. John Octor can answer any further questions about the data.
Thank you.
Yep.
Since we haven't had a chance to hear from you yet, Harry, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then I know there's some Regents that have a couple questions.
Excellent. Good afternoon. My name is Harry Anderson. I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of Students and Senior Student Affairs Officer at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. Again, I want to take a moment to recognize our students. Thank you, and thank you. Their stories are, I would say, for my colleagues that are watching this live streaming it a few floors down in a room, it's our reality every day. And to our mental health professionals that are boots on the ground, meeting with our students day to day, working to their capacities, I want to thank them as well. Regents, I'd also like to thank you for your time today, acknowledging us and bringing us to the table, and really starting this dialogue. I think it is a critical dialogue that will help us improve our services, not just on individual campuses, but as a system. And I hope that this is the beginning of several other conversations as we move forward. President Cross, I'd like to thank you as well for pushing us and sitting down and taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to us when we brought a concern forward to you and making sure that we had an avenue to voice our concerns. So I appreciate that. And last but not least, you can tell gratitude's a big thing for me, because I know when somebody shows gratitude towards me, it makes me feel good. I want to take a minute and thank Chris Navia and Ann Minson for their work and their support in helping make sure that today happens. So I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in getting us here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harry. Regent Hall, start us off.
Yeah, well, I know, Tammy, UW Parkside and UW Green Bay, you had a couple of slides in the presentation. What were the additional comments that you have based on?
Okay. I won't go through the whole presentation thing. Really, what we want to talk about is kind of personalizing for how does that look on a campus? What does that look like? So for me, like, interestingly, as I was pulling my notes together last night, I got an email from the police saying, FYI, we transported this person for suicidal ideation. I'm thinking, what a different world we're in. That 5 years ago, that's a phone call in the middle of the night saying, you better alert the president or the chancellor. And now we have 1 to 2 of those a week. And in high stress times of the semester, 3 to 5 in a week that we're sending to a crisis center because we're afraid that they're going to, commit suicide or whatever. And then we talk a little bit at my campus about what are some of the emerging trends that we're seeing. So for us, something that's really exciting for us is we're diversifying really rapidly as a campus. 25% of our new freshmen are students of color, which for us is very, very different. We have a very strong LGBTQ ranking, which is bringing us more and more LGBTQ students, which is awesome, but they bring a different set of challenges and concerns. And those students are coming to me and saying, Eric, I need somebody who speaks my language. I need somebody who looks like me. I need who can empathize with me. And so that's a challenge that we're facing. You know, Anjali was wonderful talking about the veteran experience. That's another emerging issue on our campus. We're blessed to have 5% of our students are veterans. But again, they have specific needs and they want people who can work with them. And I think, you know, there's just a myriad of issues of how that's impacting us individually. You know, we have the same as everybody else, the long wait times. You hear the student story of, you know, for me, waiting 3 weeks for something is frustrating, but whatever. When you can't function, that's a really, it's an eternity. So those are the kind of things, we're just kind of trying to personalize on our campus what that looks like. And again, I did 10 minutes there in about 40 seconds, but just to kind of give you a flavor. I don't know, Tammy, if you have a different take.
Yeah, I think for Parkside, much of the same. We talked about, and what I was going to share was that roughly 60% of our students are Pell eligible. 25% of our students have an estimated family contribution of 0, which means that they're receiving no family support, financial support for college. Many of our students come to school and they come to campus and they're really not sure that they belong there, right? They're questioning whether or not they belong in college. And so they are looking for those supports. And part of what I was going to talk about is the other areas that are impacted by this. And so Eric mentioned that students are wanting to see people who look like them. And so I'd say our OMSA staff, our Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, that's where many of our students of color will go because, one, they want to see someone like themselves, but they also perceive that those staff members understand their struggles, where maybe somebody else doesn't understand their struggles. And so those aren't 5-minute conversations with students. And so my assistant dean of students, who's the director of the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, I bet that 3 hours out of any given day, he spends one-on-one with students, just talking through with them the challenges that they're having and the support options that are available to them and helping them to make some decisions. We know through other surveys on our campus for Parkside, our students are working more than their system peers and their national peers. We know that through the National Survey of Student Engagement. We know that they are less likely to have health insurance, and so therefore they're not able to seek the treatment through providers off campus if we're not able to provide that. We talked about psychiatric services. We contract with a psychiatrist for 8 to 10 hours a month. That is the service that we have. And so when our nurse practitioners, one of my slides talks about 33% of our health center visits last year were behavioral health issue related. So we have 2 part-time nurse practitioners, and they're very well equipped to deal with several behavioral health issues. But there are some cases that they don't feel that they're trained well enough for that, and those are the cases that are referred to the psychiatrist. But when his schedule fills up, then we have very few options to refer students to in our local community, and so that's a stressor for us. One of the other things, our Dean of Students office is the office, and on many of our campuses, that's the office that deals with students who are looking for medical withdrawals. And so if they are struggling in the classroom or they're having health issues that they feel like they need to step away from school, they work through the Dean of Students office. That's an individual working relationship between the student and a staff member who's looking at what are the issues, what's the medical documentation that they have, what are the options as to whether they can stay in school or if they are going to step away, how do they re-enter. But what we've seen in the last 4 years is our number of medical withdrawals for psychological and physical health issues went from 43 in 2014 to 103 in 2017-18. That more than doubled. And so when we talk about persistence and retention, these are also the issues that we're talking about. And we thank, and as Harry did, we thank all of our staff in the Counseling and Health Center, but we're also having to thank, you know, our staff in those other offices, Residence Life. That's another area where those are the folks living with the students on campus. They're the first that often recognize that something's going on. They help the individual student to look at what resources are available to them, but those staff members are also the ones that are helping the roommates and the friends on the hall who are dealing with the, you know, what has happened and the traumas of what's going on with that individual student. And so all of the staff across student affairs are really putting in a lot of hours. And that, I think, is the thing that we don't see, is the amount of time that we deal with individual student situations. And again, Sandy started us out by saying where we really want to focus our energies is the health promotion and the awareness down on that tier 3 level. But the people that are best equipped to do those outreach exercises and programs, they're the ones that are struggling to balance and to take on the needs of all of the increase in the appointments that we need. So we don't have the resources to do the educational stuff that we want to do to help people not make it to those crisis periods.
Let's say one 30-second addition that I forgot to mention is that we're fortunate and excited to now be a 4-campus university, which is really exciting. But that means that we have 4 behavioral intervention teams, and the connections between those is a bit of a challenge we're working out. And unfortunately, we did have a completed suicide on our Manitowoc campus this spring, and it was a student leader who was very involved, very well known. And it's amazing how that really impacted all 4 campuses, which I didn't anticipate how quickly we would kind of blend together. But again, the time and effort, which of course you have to do because it's so critically important, has been impactful.
Thank you. Regent Mueller.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all that you do. Even I cannot ask a data question today after such an emotional presentation. But I do have a communication concern. I'm worried about the disconnect or the apparent disconnect between the presentation we had last month about our academic success initiative and this emotional testimony today, because we're very aggressively working on academic success and frequent contact and phone calls and such. That group has to be working closely with the behavioral health staff. And I'm asking, will that be done? Is it being done?
Yeah, we're on the initial stages of the EAB implementation, of course, on the campuses, but on many of the campuses, the actual, if you take out the technology implementation piece, right? But what will be different and how will we know who are students who need support? That is a joint academic and student affairs effort on many of our campuses. I can speak at UW Stout. It's both our provost and I who are sharing in the program ownership and sponsorship to make that happen.
Well, if I may, I would argue it needs to be all. Again, I think that if I were getting a call
You're right.
4 times a week saying you need to do better in school, and I'm under great mental distress, that would worsen the situation, not improve it.
Thank you.
You're correct.
Regent Tyler.
So as you retreat in an emotional, the difference with me is I probably migrate toward data to avoid the emotional. So
There's a name for that. And he says there's a medicine
So what Mark wanted to ask is, are Regents eligible for care?
almost.
We will include, absolutely.
So, I look at the percentages and I look at, okay, if, even if student populations have higher percentages of stress, I'm thinking about, we're accountable for students' health and safety and their outcomes, but I think about our faculty and 40,000 employees that we've got that are in front of and, people that are working with our students, and I just have to, even if we apply that percentages at 50%, how are we dealing with these issues in faculty and staff as well? And I think that's, so I'll leave it there. How are we dealing with faculty and staff as well?
You're absolutely right. There are issues that our faculty and staff are not immune from these issues, just like our students are not immune. And again, I'll share an example from UW Stout that occurred recently where a faculty member, this time it was in an advising session, it was not in front of a classroom, but could be described as a breakdown for that faculty member who we would learn has PTSD, as Angela talked about. In that particular case, human resources is of course involved when it's an employee, Our office was involved because fortunately the student did the things most students do when they don't know what to do. They called their mother, and their mother said, you really should go talk to the dean of students. And so that student came right over, and fortunately we knew about it shortly after it happened. And then we were able to involve the academic dean, our office, to get that information to the right people right away, and HR to be able to immediately intervene the same way we would with a student, the kind of questions you've been asking about with students who are in extreme distress. We intervene the same exact way. It's just that now we have an employee, and so often legal counsel is also involved in those conversations with HR. We have Empathia, or it's not Empathia anymore, but there's EAP services available to all employees. And so HR will often work with those students to take care of those kinds of needs. But it does happen. And we treat it, it's the same kind of model in many ways, just different people who are involved in it.
In Green Bay, we're looking at the EAP system that the colleges were using, which is really quite comprehensive. We have been more of an internal shop, and we are going to move towards that because it's not only counseling, it's financial, it's family, it's a lot of different things. And I think that's going to help us quite a bit. So we're kind of stealing that from the college model, which was pretty effective.
Yeah, and Regent Tyler, I appreciate that question too, and I think that speaks to how critical of a topic it is that we're talking about today, because we know the students that we graduate from UW system today will become our workforce tomorrow. And so if we can be out in front of this, and we can be the leaders, and we can help equip our students with the skills, it will help equip our workforce, and it will make for a better Wisconsin.
Thank you. Regent Jones.
Let me ask you, if our employee health care insurance covers mental health counseling for employees?
Yes.
I believe it does.
I believe it does,
To a degree.
and I would speak to that too, is that it's also, I know I can at least speak for Douglas County and Superior, that it's also a 2 to 3 month wait sometimes for services. And so I think the critical need, as President Cross pointed out earlier, working with our commissioner, the resources that are available help impact it as well.
Regent Klein.
A follow-up question to that. Do our faculty, our employees have a completely different system for this? I mean, I know you talked about an overlap, but are we leveraging the fact that we have students and employees, into one delivery system, or if you're a professor, you're over here, and you're a student, you're over here? I imagine it's that way. It's not leveraged.
Well, currently in Green Bay, we have them together, and what we found is it's prohibiting people on campus to utilize the services, faculty and staff, because they're afraid to go to a counseling center of people that they know. So we're actually now looking to outsource it and making completely separate.
Yeah, and I'd say they're one of the last holdouts with that model. Stout had that model too, and it became, because of increased student utilization as well, we just didn't have time. And faculty staff are better served actually from these more comprehensive EAP systems.
And they have different issues, though.
Yes. They do have different issues as well. It allows our campus staff to be more focused on the specific needs of students.
Thank you. Regent Delgado.
First of all, thank you to all of you for taking on this issue that to us is very important. When I look at the trends that you are showing us, I have to believe that, frankly, we're treating the symptom and not the problem. There is a problem here, and it's preceding us. We have no choice but to face it, and that's your role. And you're asking for resources that we should give them to you. But, we're sitting here in a tall building in a university that has humongous medical resources, and a university system that has a charge to, go to all of Wisconsin. And I'm having a hard time with the problem, not knowing what it is. Okay, and I have to say, we have to get at the problem. Now, it could be that parts of the problem we don't want to face. Okay? I have to be open to that socially we don't like to face some parts of our problem. Maybe that's the case, but I don't know what it is. So that could be an issue. But the fact is that there is a problem we haven't identified. It's very apparent to me. And whenever I see curves like you're showing me, I have to believe that there's something acting here that might be an elephant in the room. Or it could be a mouse in the room. I don't care. But I think that this is absolutely, I'm looking now at Ray Cross, which happens to be the president of our system. And this is absolutely, if I were in a corporation, I would have a great difficulty dealing with it. If I'm the University of Wisconsin, I feel I have resources here which are over the top. So from my perspective, I think this is a role. There's a role here much bigger than what you're doing, even though what you're doing is an essential necessity. But it's got to be beyond that. We can get many more people like you. Okay, we can staff them up. Okay, and I still feel that we're plugging the hole in the dam, not the dam in the hole in the dam. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm dissatisfied. Not with you, incident. You're doing a great job. Our problem is dissatisfied as an institution that has humongous resources that you say, okay, we're doing many great things, but this one is having apparently a great impact. We hear from the superintendent, and I was thinking, I'm sorry, it's not enough to staff you up. So I got to tell you. So I'm going to say there's something missing here. I don't know what it is, but it's gone. So, I have to tell you, I'm very dissatisfied. And I see a necessity, but I don't see a solution. And frankly, I'm eager to find the root of it. And if it is something missing us, we better face it. If it is a social issue, we better face it. If it is an issue that, if we're putting ourselves in tremendous pressure, we better face it. We're talking about teaching our professors how to detect this. I would like to teach our parents how to detect this. I don't know if that makes sense, but you know what? I got to go to the root. Otherwise, this thing is going to overwhelm us. This dam is going to break, And I'm not satisfied. We're supposed to be helping develop people who are resilient. And we're not dependent on anything. I mean, depending on each other, no doubt about it, but not depending on treatment. We'd like to see people who can handle things. And the question is, how do we get there? Well, I don't know. But my impression is that we better find out. And that's my conclusion of this whole thing. And your heart breaks at the situation, and I have been involved with it. When you run a power plant with 600 employees, you have drugs and suicides and psychologicals and depressions and everything else, and you deal with it every day. And you wish you were going back to the equipment. It would be easier. But you know what? There is a cost. We got to find it. We got to go after it. And I think this game, unless it gets addressed, if it is going at those rates, there's something here that is unstable. And I don't like unstable systems. I'm a control engineer.
Thank you, Regent Delgado. Regent Creevy.
First of all, thank you. I think that this was probably the most compelling presentation that I've seen during my time on the board. And I'm very grateful to everybody who was involved. Thank you. Early on, someone made the point that one of the reasons that this is so important is because it is part of educating the whole student. I don't recall who exactly said that. It was a while ago, but it was certainly memorable. But I have a very direct question. Aside from more resources, what would you ask us to do?
I think, can I have a couple of them? A couple of things, because again, I don't believe personally we can resource our way out of this. I think staffing matters. I don't think it's the whole solution. I think opportunities for a system to perhaps consider regionalization of some services that are really difficult to get in some of our communities. We couldn't afford a psychiatric nurse on each of our campuses. We know that. But can we afford perhaps, can we look at creative ways to share services that are, especially in rural communities, unable to get in a way that might be helpful? I think telehealth is something that we absolutely want to consider. I think an online training program that we get requests all the time, John and I on our campus, to go into departments or to colleges, the different colleges, and talk with faculty and staff about how to refer students and what does this mean when the student's in crisis. And we're happy to do that, but we're also dealing with so many of the other issues and other parts of our job that if there could be an online training developed, that in addition to the in-person training that we're doing, that faculty or staff member who wants to take more time and really think about that, or suddenly recognizes something in their classroom and has the time to be do sort of an online training that they can think about that differently. I think that would be helpful. I think for many of our students, what they would say they would like besides staff who may look like them or can understand them better, it's the access to that 24/7 opportunity to, it's hard to call a national crisis. It's hard. And so for a student to be able to know the person I'm talking to can understand what I'm talking about at 3 in the morning when our centers aren't open, I think that could make a difference. I think there's well-tracked, a lot, again, that tier 1, a lot of our students don't need counseling, but they need an option to sort of perhaps review online. Here's some of the symptoms I have. Maybe it means that I should perhaps get a meditation app on my phone that would help me sort of relax before I go into an exam. I just think there are a wealth of things we can do, and not all of them would have to cost a lot of money.
I'd go back to Regent Delgado's statement about we have tremendous, especially here, there's tremendous skills and experiences in this area, and we have faculty and staff that are afraid, don't know what's going on. Can we mobilize some of that talent, take them to our campuses, or bring our campuses here and train everyone? I think that would cost very little and be really, really impactful.
I also think the comment about thinking about it from a K-16 perspective,
Yes.
we would all support that wholeheartedly. When we participate in our behavior, so behavior intervention teams have been commonplace now, continue to get refined at the college level for about the last 10 years. They're just starting in many K-12 schools. We have resources we can share with K-12 about how to set those up and how to do those and structure them in ways that can really help students be saved in many cases. So I think that partnership is invaluable.
Yeah, and I think it would take time to review the different tiers that we've talked about today. I think each one of our campuses could identify our specific needs exactly, and probably put dollar amounts to it from that perspective. But I think looking at a system of bringing us together and looking at each of those tiers, because if you knock down one domino in a positive direction, that's gonna only help support and build. And I think to Regent Delgado's point of resiliency too, I think our students are resilient. I think we saw 3 of them today. I also think that we can do a better job to help students because it's a lot different these days than it was when I was back in college. And so I think helping them bring out that resiliency and teaching them those skills and equipping them with those skills is an item we have to
I'm
look
from
into.
the 60s. These young people are much better than we were. I'm going to tell you right now. This is dynamite. We were.
Regent Whitburn, you're next.
Crack each other up. I agree with Regent Greeby as to the extent to which this has been the most poignant presentation that any of us that have been on this board for a while has heard. I disagree with my colleague to my left. What we're talking about here, it seems to me, is one of society's most challenging, fundamentally most difficult issues. And wherever we are, in small town, rural, northern Wisconsin, or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where I came from, or in Park Avenue in Manhattan, the challenge around these issues is getting increasingly difficult. So with due respect, Jose, we can't expect our people to have any easy bottom line answers. The good news and the blessing that we can see here that's so crystal clear is that we have ever more focus than we've ever had before. Yes. And that is a key step toward goodness. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Whitburn. Regents, any other questions? Seeing none, let's give our presenters another round of applause. Let's move on to item number 5 on the agenda. We'll have an update on the restructuring of UW colleges and UW Extension. To lead that update, I'll call on Vice Presidents Kramer and Schmidt.
Good afternoon. Interim Vice President Schmidt and I appreciate the time to provide an update to the board on the restructuring of UW Colleges and Extension. When approved by the board in 2017, the restructuring set ambitious goals focused on student success, which we've just been speaking about at length. At that time, the Chronicle of Higher Education considered our endeavor to be one of the largest restructuring efforts in the nation. Karen will jump now to focus and talk about some of the goals.
Thank you, Rob. I'm very pleased today to report that we are now beginning to turn goals into milestones. And these milestones aren't the kind of project management milestones that, like the dates and the deliverables that Rob will be reporting to you on. These are outcomes-based milestones that mark our progress toward building the new UW system, a system which will ensure access, maintain affordability, and increase opportunities for students. The first step toward this milestone was ensuring the continuity of accreditation for the branch campuses through the restructuring process. The first step was accomplished when the Higher Learning Commission approved the UW system's change of control application, which was effective July 1st, 2018. This accreditation milestone was achieved. The next accreditation milestone was really achieved in March when HLC's Institutional Actions Committee affirmed the peer reviewers' findings that the UW system had addressed all concerns related to the approval of the change of structure. This is an important milestone because all future HLC reviewing and reporting will now take place through the regular accreditation review processes at the receiving institutions. The HLC affirmation of the UW system restructuring also recognized the strengths of the UW system leadership and collaboration at the board, system, and institutional levels. In addition to these strengths, the HLC also identified 4 priority areas of concern that will continue to be monitored within the regular and ongoing institutional accreditation cycles. These areas are student services, enrollment, communication, and financial sustainability. Transfer was a core component of the UW College's mission, and one of the primary goals of restructuring is to reduce barriers for students transferring within and between all UW institutions. A transfer milestone was achieved in March with the integration of the UW College's Guaranteed Transfer Program into System Administration Policy 135, which guides undergraduate transfer. So how does the UW System Guaranteed Transfer Admission Program work? Well, there are 4 primary requirements for students. And if they meet these 4 requirements, then there will be guaranteed admission to the 4-year institution which they selected and declared their intent to transfer to. With this program now in policy, though, we are all focused on communicating the importance of seamless transfer to students. We all want students, parents, advisors, and community members to know that students who choose to start at a branch campus can transfer to any 4-year institution, and the transfer options are not limited to a branch campus of the 4-year receiving institution. On a personal note, I can think that the message of start here and go anywhere is actually getting through. My nephew, who's now completing his freshman year at UW Stevens Point in Wausau, is actually exploring 4 separate transfer pathway options within the UW system. Although it does help that he has a mom who's a Whitewater alum and 2 aunts who are Madison alum and a grandmother who's a Platte Mill alum. So I guess UW Stevens Point has their recruiting work cut out for them this fall. The third milestone is the expansion of degree programs. New programs are becoming available on many of the branch campuses as we speak. These opportunities include programs at the associate, bachelor's, and master's level. After a year of institutional planning and community engagement, these opportunities are now emerging. So to conclude, these milestones mark significant progress toward the goals of restructuring and serve as points of pride to the system as well. And as such, they will serve as guides to take us into the future and looking ahead to build the new UW system. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Rob.
So just providing an update on some of the mechanics. We're now into 40 weeks into phase one of the restructuring, and the pace is picking up as additional services are transitioned to the receiving institutions, and we continue to prepare for the 2019-20 academic year. As a reminder, July 1st, 2019 is the start of phase two of the restructuring. Looking towards this point, I want to note that we have identified October 31st, 2019 as our substantial completion milestone for the restructuring project. And to define that a little bit, if you think about before that event, the steering committee we established will be continuing to meet before October 31st. Functional and workstream teams will be continuing their activities, and we'll be going through the 90, 60, and 30-day checkoffs we talked about before as services transition. Once the MOU period is completed July 1st, we'll have transferred a majority of services to receiving institutions, and then we'll be into phase two. After that October 31st milestone, looking forward then to June of 2020, the steering committee likely has completed its work. The functional teams are for the most part done, and phase two deliverables, such as complete financial aid management by the receiving institutions, are in place. And as my last comment, I wanted to reflect on this chart again, which shows the different elements being coordinated as we work towards the conclusion of phase one and move into phase two. The integrated roadmap there towards the bottom is our path forward to that October 31st milestone, and then afterwards to the end of phase two. And we're also now working on coordinating with the development of the shared services roadmap and delivery of services there, making that migration and transition from MOU services to shared services. And with that, I think we have a video of some student voices.
So far, so good.
Oh. Make it knows what to do that. I guess we'll just move on. Okay, let's do that discussion.
Board members? Board members, any questions for our two vice presidents? Regent Peterson.
Thank you for the presentation, guys. This feels like a much longer slog than it actually was, and I think that's a huge compliment. You know, three really big things stand out. First, you know, the HLC component I had the opportunity to participate in. They asked volumes of important questions, and we, I think, answered them in a very, very effective way, which is critically important to all the work that many committees participated in. This is not about me by any means. The articulation agreements, Mark Tyler and I worked on those very aggressively with the tech college system. This memorializes those and then modernizes them and advances them, which I think is critically important. And then perhaps the most important thing that was kind of buried in here at the end is, and it'll be relevant to our next presentation, is many of the new programs that are happening in our regional campuses are high impact practice programs. That's going to do three things, I think. It's going to drive enrollment, which is of vital importance to all of us, right? It's also going to work with seamless transition. So for those folks that come to our transitional access schools are going to have that panoply of options, as you pointed out. And then ultimately, it's going to improve our workforce and make Wisconsin a stronger place to live and work and raise a family. And, you know, I think President Cross's vision, along with all of those planning committees, has come to fruition. And for that, we should all be very, very grateful. You know, we take a lot of arrows here at the Board of Regents, but I think it's our staff and our teams that should take a lot of accomplishment and compliment for that too. This is really a milestone that I think we should celebrate. So thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Atwell.
First of all, thank you very much for your work. I agree with Regent Peterson that process seems to have gone, you know, very relatively smoothly for given the scale that there is. And perhaps someone's already explained this to me, in which case I'll take it offline. But a number of these branch campuses prior to the restructuring were experiencing substantial structural losses, financial deficits, and essentially in the process of folding them into their four-year institutions. What really, from an accounting point of view, what happened, or from a financing point of view, budgeting point of view, I don't know, does Sean disappear here, or is he? What really happened to those structural losses? Did the campuses absorb those? Were we going to realize efficiencies? Where did they go? What are you doing with them? Did you already tell me this? I didn't listen.
So as President Cross made the commitment at the outset that we would solve for those structural deficits for this current fiscal year, which closes June 30th, and the following fiscal year, FY20. We haven't discussed anything beyond that period right now, but I know that the campuses are doing some planning now to accommodate for some of those structural deficits, but more to come, Bob. Regent Atwell.
Thank you. I'm just relieved that you hadn't already answered it for me.
Regent Milner.
I want to thank you. Thank you for what's happening with this restructuring. This is, I won't say again, I'll just ditto what has already been said. But we had an opportunity to listen about the program development at the campuses, how we approach the program development at the campuses, and how we and what our collaborative programs are between our institutions at the Education Committee this morning. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to share that information with the whole board, because it's really illustrative of what's happening between and among our campuses, but also between the campuses, the receiving comprehensives and the two-year campuses. So thank you both for the financials, what's happening financially, and also what's happening with the programs.
Thank you, Regent Milner. Any other questions, Regents? If not, President Cross, I know you have some conclusion remarks.
So I obviously would like to thank everyone involved in this, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I really want to thank the chancellors that are doing this, and I want to explain some of the challenges we face. But I was doing some consulting for General Motors years ago. They totally re-automated, wrong phrase, totally tore down the Poletown plant where the W-body Cadillac was built at that time. And the individual they put in charge of that just got fired. He tried to explain to them, as we go through this change, the quality on this car and the cost and the production will keep declining. And they would bring him back in front of the board, and the board, when is this going to turn around? Because the cost was going like, the productivity was going like this, and the cost was up, and it was really frustrating to General Motors, where he kept saying, "Be patient." And I remember talking to some folks, thinking, I don't think the board wants to be very patient. I'm saying that because the enrollment decline that we're experiencing at these campuses is not over yet. It's still going down. It's going to take a while to turn that back up, and at some point it's better. It's never going to turn around to where it was years ago. That's not the point. Demographics are prohibiting that, but the improved economy, the demographics, all impinge on that. I'm saying that because these folks are dealing with financial challenges. Yes, we're trying to resolve these structural issues, but the declining enrollment is exacerbating their financial challenges. So the 7 institutions that are the receiving institutions are grappling with those numbers, and I just want to thank you for that. We're going to do everything we can to help you. We're appreciative that Governor Evers put money into the budget, proposed to put money in the budget for those institutions, and we're grateful for that. Obviously, we need some resources. They've been depleted. They've been challenged. I want to emphasize that the swamp we're standing isn't over yet. We're working toward the shore, but it's not over yet, and it takes some time. With that, I want to specifically thank the chancellors who are working on that. That's challenging. But also Rob and Karen, the leaders of this, and several members of their team. And actually, literally, thousands throughout the system that have worked on this, on the campus and in the system. It's been impressive. It's just, and the thing that I keep looking at is the time frame to accomplish this. The HLC folks made reference to this. Boy, this was an accelerated time frame. How did you get this far, this fast? And the compliments we got about that and the thoroughness, all the details. All of you that know Rob, the guy is very detailed and and very much into that process. So Rob, thanks for doing that. All the planning and the careful engagement of everybody, the thoughtfulness, you folks deserve a lot of praise. And you got to remember that the Connecticut system attempted to do something similar, and the accrediting body threw it out. Utah had significant problems. So to be where we are today is a credit to you folks. It really is. And the chancellors stepping up and doing that, inheriting these structural deficits and the challenges that enrollment is bringing to them. You already had a headache, so we appreciate you taking on some more. So, and thanks to the board for supporting this effort. We probably won't see the impact of this, and you see some of it expressed in the students who are speaking in sign language, I guess, I don't know. But you see some of their comments up here, and that means a lot. That means an awful lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Let's give our presenters and our chancellors a round of applause. We'll now turn to our final item on the agenda this afternoon, item number 6. This is a discussion of high-impact practices. To start us off on this issue, I'll first turn to President Cross. President Cross, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Regent President Baling. In our 2020 forward, I want to keep holding this up. Our second major goal dealt with the university experience, how to provide a dynamic learning university experience for our students. One of those aspects, in fact, the first one, we called it U2, that involves high impact practices. We abbreviate that as HIPS. These practices include things like internships, undergraduate research, capstone experiences, first year college experience. All of those things contribute to retention and perceived value of their education. They have an enormous impact. So why are we focused on this? Because the data shows us that these provide a number of benefits that you may not realize. Obviously, persistence and graduation rates, a higher rate of student-faculty interaction. When you ask an alum, what do they remember about the institution? They remember their friends, they remember what was going on. They don't remember a lot about the courses, but they'll remember 1, 2, or 3 faculty members that had an important impact on their lives. That occurs through faculty-student interaction. Increases in critical thinking, not just indoctrination, hopefully not any indoctrination, but critical thinking, writing skills, greater appreciation for diversity, deeper approaches to learning, and higher student engagement overall. So today, as part of the ongoing focus on high-impact practices, you'll learn more about integrating these and applied learning. For that, we call on Dr. Carleen Van de Zan, UW's Associate VP for Academic Programs and Educational Innovation. Carleen?
Thank you, President Cross, and thank you for this opportunity to update the board about our current progress on our 2020 forward goal that focuses on the undergraduate experience. We'd also like to give an overview of a grant that we are participating in that is related to this goal that 5 of our system campuses are working on as part of the Taking Student Success to Scale initiative, where we're focusing on high-impact practices and equity-minded pathways as a national project. This grant is funded by the Lumina Foundation and sponsored by the National Association of System Heads. The UW system is joining 3 other systems, Montana, Tennessee, and Georgia, as leaders in examining the quality, the equity-minded approaches, and the scalability of these high-impact practices that President Cross just described for us. We want to describe and discuss our grant goals and how this work is influencing the efforts of UW-Whitewater, one of our grant participants. I have with me here Dr. Joan Littlefield Cook, who is the, Interim Associate Provost at UW-Whitewater, and Dr. LaVarle Charleston, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Diversity, Engagement, and Success at UW-Whitewater. And they're going to give us some very specific campus-based examples. I could have asked chancellors and provosts, I could have asked any of our institutions to join us today, but due to limitations of our time, we just have one of our campuses here. And I want to let you know that we have a very deep bench when it comes to high impact practices here at the system. We'd like to start the presentation by hearing from students, staff, and leadership from UW-Whitewater, who recently participated in a symposium on undergraduate research. Oops.
It's indeed a pleasure to be here. It's truly an exciting time as we get to see the brilliant work of students and of faculty and student and faculty teams. We know that this work, research, is really what sparks innovation, and we know that you all are truly going to be the leaders of tomorrow, so this work is truly important.
Today is a celebration of the outstanding research in the arts, the sciences, education, business, and the social sciences. All of this stems from the passionate work of UW-Whitewater students.
The brief summary of my research is I'm trying to find associations between ST2IL33 and cognitive outcome and severe malaria groups, the individual groups that we have, if there's any associations within all 3 of them. Or if you are able to treat this disease, it's going to be easier for most of these economies that are in the global south to develop by redirecting those funds to the economy, and it's going to be good in the long run.
My research is about tattoos. I took a look at ancient Japanese art and design, and I mixed those with some more contemporary and Western ideas, specifically feminism. And the main goal is to show that women shouldn't be defined by gender roles. And it's also to show that tattoos can be an art form.
Yeah, there's a couple of my friends in my major who are presenting, and they've just done a lot of hard work, and it's nice to see their accomplishments.
I think they're all really cool, and they're all doing really important things in different fields.
I believe that undergraduate research is one of the most important high-impact educational practices because it enables students to do a variety of different things. Hands-on learning, it enhances the student learning experiences through mentoring relationships with faculty. It promotes enhancements in research for faculty as well as promotes greater engagement with students, colleagues, and the community.
So as you all can see, based on the students' presentations and how they talked about their work, that there's a great deal of impact on the students as it relates to their undergraduate research experience, and it's similar for other high-impact practices as well. It helps to develop critical thinking, creativity, problem-solving, self-confidence, intellectual independence, and moreover promotes really an innovative-oriented culture as it relates to high-impact practices. At this single event here, we had 96 projects and 177 student participants. That just gives you an example of the sort of engagement that we're involving students in at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater.
We want all of our students in the UW system to have access to these rich educational experiences as they are addressed in our system strategic plan. Think about learning experiences that you had during your undergraduate programs that were transformative, that had a great influence on you, and that allowed you to put into practice what you had learned. For me, it was my study abroad program in Spain, where I studied at a conservatory of music. I gained knowledge and skill in language and music performance, but more important than that, it gave me the confidence to speak and perform in various settings and to develop deep intercultural understanding. I was able to attend master classes with world-class performers and even had an unplanned opportunity to meet the King of Spain. That's another story for another day. Our system institutions are currently offering educational experiences that provide opportunities for students to apply their learning. However, we know that we can aim for higher quality and extend these experiences to all students, especially students who research has shown will benefit from these experiences the most. Let's key in on some definitions of high impact practices. They demand considerable time and effort. These aren't a once and done experience. They're over an extended period of time. They facilitate learning inside the classroom and sometimes make that transition from in the classroom to outside the classroom. They provide for meaningful interactions between faculty and students and extended interactions over time. They encourage collaboration with a diverse range of students and faculty. And during that engagement with faculty and students have what's called a feedback loop, frequent feedback as well. George Koo, a higher education researcher at the Indiana Center for Post-Secondary Research, has found that as a result of participation in these practices, students experience life-changing events. Many of our institutions have engaged with initiatives such as those sponsored by AAC&U and participated in the LEAP initiative over the last decade. And our institutions have come to similar conclusions about the impact on student success. Koo recommends that institutions should aspire for all students to have at least 2 high-impact practices over the course of their undergraduate experience, one during the first year and then one later in their major. So on this slide, we have a list of the common high-impact practices, and you may recognize some of these things have been around a long time, such as undergraduate research and internship and study abroad. But others are new and have emerged in the last decade, such as e-portfolios, common intellectual experiences, and learning communities. As we looked at our work over the last couple of years, we examined where these experiences are positioned in the undergraduate student's trajectory and how our institutions are using these practices to achieve their own institution strategic goals related to student success. It's common for an institution to have freshman seminars or first-year experiences in the early part of a student's undergraduate career, as we have seen at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and UW Green Bay. Also very commonplace are capstone experiences, such as senior seminars, internships, and research projects that are culminating experiences at the end of a student's program. These are found at many of our institutions. Examples we saw are the capstone experience required of all students at UW-Oshkosh in the University Studies program. This is also the case in the communication department at UW Parkside. Students may engage in service learning, undergraduate research, and study abroad as they progress throughout their program, as seen in the array of choices at UW-Eau Claire, UW River Falls, and UW Madison. However, students' participation in HIPS, high-impact practices, is episodic. In most cases, it's not intentional. We hope to identify frameworks of the curriculum so that students will not miss these opportunities. We hope to identify frameworks so that they can engage in at least 2 high-impact practices, as COO recommends, throughout their undergraduate experience. And most importantly, we want to ensure that underrepresented students have access to high-impact practices through well-planned pathways across the curriculum. Oftentimes, high-impact practices are part of campus retention and student success strategies, or at the conclusion of academic programs where students transition from the university to the world of work, such as with internships and undergraduate research. So how are we doing? One measure that we use, we have our campuses participate in the National Survey for Student Engagement, which is a national measure. And we've seen that over the last couple administrations, from 2014 to 2017, we really haven't moved the needle much. So this is our place where we are starting. And we hope that through another administration of the National Survey of Student Engagement, we'll see that number go up. There are also many campus measures as well that we'll talk about. So we're at 67%. The national average is higher. So we have a heavy lift. We hope to increase these numbers across the next 5 years, and we're setting goals for 2025 at this point. One way to promote growth of high-impact practices is to be intentional about the design, the access, and the quality of these high-impact experiences. To that end, we have a goal, a strategic priority in our strategic plan, and that is to grow a more creative and engaging educational experience so all learners can compete and succeed in a global environment. Higher impact practices are the vehicle to that engagement. The timing of our grant from the Lumina Foundation could not have been better. The grant allows us then to work on our system goals to create increased quality, find ways to scale high impact practices, and improve the equitable access for all students in these practices. We have 5 campuses participating in this: Eau Claire, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Whitewater, and Parkside. These campuses are working on a set of common goals to create high-impact practices that extend across the curriculum, just not the bookends, but across the curriculum. We're also working on assessment so that we can measure achievement gaps and opportunities to improve that. And we're also, as a system, looking for ways to design system-wide data collection for reporting on student learning and to monitor opportunity gaps. At this point, I'm going to turn our presentation over to our colleagues from UW-Whitewater, who can take us deeper in this discussion by showcasing some campus examples.
Thank you, Carlene. At the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, we offer a suite of high-impact practices that students can engage in from the moment they set foot on our campus and actually participate in throughout their trajectory, throughout their matriculation through senior year. The diagram demonstrates particular HIPs that students can participate in. This is not at all an exhaustive list, and you can see how some of these high-impact practices go across the years. New student seminar, for example, 90% of our freshmen participate, over 90% of our freshmen participate in new student seminar. And the freshmen who take these courses are more likely to return for their sophomore year and also have higher graduation rates than those who do not participate. These programs are designed to engage students give them opportunities to engage with faculty, to adjust them to college, And when you think about the type of students we have at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, for example, 40% of our students are first-generation college-going students. So giving them the tools that's necessary for them to effectively navigate higher education and engage with faculty earlier on in the process, which really sets them up for participation in other high-impact practices throughout their trajectories. Another one I'll mention is learning communities. We have approximately 38 learning communities and around 650 students who participate in these communities. And these communities entail 20 to 25 students, all freshmen, who have similar interests and engage in programmatic activities that help them that help guide their path through their freshman year, and also engage them with faculty and other mentors. Another program I'll just highlight is the Research Apprentice Program. And this is an innovative program really designed to address the equity gap. This program is designed for freshmen and sophomore students to engage them in research experiences, research apprenticeship experiences as a paid apprentice for faculty, and really sets them up to matriculate in some of these other areas: community-based learning, undergraduate research, study abroad, travel study programs, internships, etc.
So one of the things is, as LeVar just said, you can see that there are multiple opportunities for high impact practices from the minute students get to campus until the time they graduate. High impact practices are built into our campus strategic plan, but I think it's really important to understand that high impact practices and the LEAP initiative overall really is part of our culture at Whitewater. It's built into the fabric of our institution. We've been participating in LEAP initiatives, LEAP workshops for over a decade, and every year there are anywhere from 25 to 30 teams, LEAP teams. They do projects. So it really is part of who we are as a campus. And it's built into the strategic plan. Goal 2 of our plan says we will transform lives and impact society. And in part, the way that we want to do that is by establishing and promoting well-defined and effective high-impact practices. So part of, with the grant work, what we're doing is building on work that had been going on campus to better define what high-impact practices are, to identify what students are, what we want them to learn from each of those practices, and then to start getting data on how well are we doing with that? How well are they accomplishing those things? So to try and accomplish this, goal, one of the changes we made is we did some structural reorganization of some of our units.
So we've centralized our high impact practices, or many of our high impact practices, to fall under one unit, the Office of Student Diversity, Engagement, and Success. Therein houses undergraduate research program, university honors program, community-based learning, study abroad and travel study programs, a lot of our identity-based student support service programs, as well as our merit-based scholarship programs. This provides a central location, a physical location, as well as interaction between the leaders of these units and students therein, to be able to effectively navigate from one high impact practice to the next. Research has indicated, as has been mentioned before, that students who participate in 2 or more high impact practices are more likely to be successful in college, more likely to decrease their time to graduation rates. And so our goal in sort of centralizing these units is really to take advantage of that centralized location and enable students to easily move from, for example, we have a King Chavez Scholarship Program, which introduces students from the freshman year to research, to move on to the undergraduate research program or to honors, or our McNair Scholars Program, which is really designed to prepare students for doctoral studies as well. And so it also really highlights the importance of equity and access and participation. So when we think about high impact practices and who's participating, who's not, and think about the equity gaps that we have on campus and our goal to shrink those gaps, high impact practice is a viable tool in order to do so, and sort of structuring it in this centralized way really enhances connection with equity-minded programs that have been virtually in existence for years. And
they're working. They're having an impact. I heard several people say you're data people, you like data, so I'm a data person too. So every year, or every semester actually, we survey students who are graduating, and we ask them a number of questions about their experiences at Whitewater and the impact of those. This past fall 2018, we added a few questions about high impact practices. So we asked students which ones they participated in, and we asked about the impact of those practices on two aspects of their development: social and personal development, and then academic and professional development. So what we found, and this is just fall data, so we'll do this again here in a few weeks. 585 students responded. That's about 78%, so it's a pretty good response rate. 94% of students reported at least one high-impact practice. So that's good. But even better, the average number of HIPs per student was 2.61. So the system goal of having students participate in at least two high-impact practices by the time they graduate, this group of students has met that, okay? And I expect similar results in the spring. So, so we were really happy with that. Also interesting were the reports, and this is self-report data, but it's asking students about impact. I've pulled out some data here on the two high-impact practices that we're focusing on in the NASH TS3 grant: on-campus student employment, and we'll explain a little bit more about how that's high impact in a few minutes. But students who had been employed on campus during their time at Whitewater, if you add those top two bars, 75% of them said there was a moderate or high impact on their social and personal development. About the same, 70%, when you add them together, moderate or high impact on their academic and professional development. So, I mean, we're happy with that. And I can tell you, from student comments, the impact was positive. So I should make that clear, right? Because you can have a really strong impact, not the way you want it, but it was positive. Similar results for the other high-impact practice that we're focusing on for the grant: community-based learning or service learning within a course. So what it tells us is, from student reports, national data, also the data that we're getting from the UW system, grants, and then our own data, it tells us that these practices, they're important for students, and they are having an impact. So that's good news, and we're really looking forward to digging even deeper into each of these and understanding them even better. One thing that you've heard us talking about several times is student employment as a high-impact practice. This is not on George Koo's list, but it should be. We think it should be. We hope it will be. Basically, what we realized, this developed out of one of the LEAP workshops, one of the LEAP teams a number of years ago. We had people from student affairs who worked with student employees, and they started looking at high-impact practices, looking at learning outcomes, and they said, there's an opportunity here. We're already doing this in pockets across campus, but there's an opportunity to really do this well, and to help transform that employment context and that experience into something that's really high impact. Supervisors began to realize their role, not just as a supervisor, but as a mentor, as an educator. And when you think about it, on our campus, we have thousands of students each year, 2,500 to 3,000 students who are employed on campus. And I'm sure that's not, it's the same case on other campuses. So when you think about the potential impact, it's huge. So there were several groups of folks across campus. They started looking at how can we be intentional and systematic in building in some of those high impact elements into student employment. So things like helping students think about not just tasks, but skills that they're learning. How can we help train supervisors? Because you have to work with the supervisors. They're the ones who are working directly with students. So trying to, again, foster this reconceptualization of employment as an educational opportunity, helping them understand how to grab those opportunistic moments as they interact with students. So we've been working with supervisors, and again, helping students understand it's not just a job. Part of that is helping them learn how to articulate that. One of the things that we know from faculty and supervisor reports is that students will often list tasks that they've done or courses that they've taken, but they don't necessarily pull out, I learned how to think critically, I learned how to solve problems, I learned how to communicate well. So how do we help in this context, help them learn to do that? And you can see a couple quotes there on the bottom. These are from student employees. The one on the left talks about realization of, perspective taking, basically, understanding other people's needs and situations. And this person got that by working in our Center for Students with Disabilities. And on the right, in the hot card office, which is the student ID card office, using critical thinking, problem solving on real problems in a real work context. So that's kind of the idea, and we've been doing this for a number of years now.
Sure. So part of our goal for the TS3 grant that Carlene and Joan both mentioned is to define, to assess, and to scale high impact practices. So thinking about our two pilot high impact practices, which is student employment that Joan talked about, as well as community-based learning, we decided to engage the campus and get some campus leaders together, and we had these workshops. So for example, we had 30 supervisors on campus who, from faculty and staff, who supervise students, brought them together to really start to look at how we are looking at and engaging our student employees, right? To really think about the elements that make high impact practices truly high impact. Thinking about whose 8 elements, and really to promote some intentionality around even things such as position descriptions to ensure that they're equity minded and that students have an equal opportunity to gain these sort of real world experiences on campus that they can transfer out once they leave our campus walls. And so we really engage in some deep questions, some critical conversations around learning outcomes, thinking about, sometimes we can get sort of in the swing of things and just sort of moving very fast and having students who just hiring students who we just know or, reference, and not really thinking about what goes into those job descriptions, what goes into the mentoring relationship between the supervisor and the student. And so we want to address those things because, again, the potential for this to be a truly high impact practice is great when you're thinking about 3,000 students being engaged with this particular high impact practice. And another thing is that when students are engaged in high impact employment practices, they're more likely to really matriculate into other high impact practices such as study abroad and community-based learning and things of that nature as well. And so again, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I think there's power in stories. And one of the quotes that a student said is, who was employed at our Pride Center, said that it increased their ability and comfort interacting with others simply by making an effort to interact with those different from me more often instead of shying away. So when we think about the tools that students are going to need to be successful, right, in a sort of a global world with the competition that's out there, these are embedded in these practices, and it's really preparing our students to get out and really embody the Wisconsin idea.
Thank you. So you can tell from the description and follow-up and intentionality from UW-Whitewater, amplify that times, add 12 more to that of our campuses. Moving forward, we are going to convene campus teams on April 10th at Memorial Union, where we will have some discussions about equity-minded high-impact practices. We'll hear from researchers from across the country looking at the effects on students, and we hope that during the next 2 years, we will have groups of faculty, SSAOs, everyone across campus come together to design these experiences, and we hope then to come back. I think that high impact practices is where a place where the campuses come together. It's the faculty, it's student affairs, it's academic affairs for a common goal. So I'm very proud of the work of our 5 campuses, and we hope to come back and report on everything else. At this point, we'll turn it back to our conveners.
Thank you. Regents, any questions this afternoon? Regent Whitburn.
Internships. In my personal experience, very critical to assessing people, kickstarting careers. Commencement next month, how many undergraduate's degrees will you have? Guessing?
25. Yeah, maybe 2,500.
So, with Regent Mueller's data question in mind, sorry for me to go quite back directly. How many do you think have had internships? Do we know?
Based on the data that we had last fall, I believe it was about maybe 12% of students reported, and that's one sample, about 12%. It might be a little higher than that, because in the spring, it's always a larger group. But so
Long way
maybe
to go.
15%, yeah.
Haven't you, President Cross, talked about everybody doing it over time? Isn't that the goal?
Yeah, striving to that, but I think they're, depending on how you define it, an internship.
Right.
Across the system, we're right around 50%.
So not everything gets tracked as an internship.
Regents, any other questions? If not, we'll go ahead and excuse our presenters, but let's give them a round of applause. With that in mind, just a reminder, Regents, of tonight's event at the Brittingham House, which President Cross is hosting, starts at 6 o'clock. Hope to see you all there, and we are adjourned. Thank you.